Chapter 1797. The result of this is that you will be completely annihilated in this world, unable to leave any trace of yourselves. As for us brothers, we will truly regain the freedom of our souls. We will probably seek refuge with Duke Marcus, the demigod of the weave, and with the blessing of his elemental energy, we will participate in the upcoming war against evil. Just like what we did in the ancient war 10,000 years ago. At this point the USOC brothers choked. This was the method that Duque had proposed. Sacrificing the souls of the corrupted bears, extracting the pure soul energy from within to repair the souls of their brothers. This was a classic case of harming others for one's own benefit. But Duque had no better idea. Soul energy was a combination of spiritual energy and life energy. The corrupted part had to be cut out, and the remaining gap to be repaired could only be filled with souls. Duque was not a titan, and perhaps even a titan could not create a soul out of nothing. In a sense, the dark energy used by the Burning Legion was just a form of soul energy extracted through violent means. Duque could not sacrifice the souls and lives of other races to repair the souls of the demigod bear brothers. The only ones who could make the decision were the bears themselves. One of the bears began to howl at the sky, followed by 100, 1,000, 10,000, tens of thousands. As a human, Duque found it difficult to understand the thoughts of the bears and the bears. He could only be sure that they had made their decision. USOC and user spoke in unison. "We have made our decision. Please begin." It had been a long time since Duque used this method of harvesting souls. Even now he did not need to enter shadow form. With a point of his finger, the vortex made of weave energy in the sky began to spin. It became a true vortex that sucked in all rivers into the sea. But what it absorbed was souls. One by one, the ethereal and illusory bear spirits were easily stripped from their corpses that were beginning to rot. Almost at the instant the spirits left their bodies, their corpses on the ground rapidly shriveled up. What the vortex brought to them was true destruction. The terrifying slicing of the spirits caused them to involuntarily let out the most mournful wails of their souls. Then all the low cries of the souls disappeared. After losing the imprint of being an individual, when the darkness was swept away by the high-speed rotation, what was left in the sky was the purest form of soul energy. This soul energy was taken over by the whirlpool controlled by Duque. The energy was continuously mixed up, compressed and compressed again before passing through a huge golden magical formation net controlled by Alonce's Fail. In the end, the soul energy that seemed to connect the heavens and the earth split into two and entered Ushik and User's spirit bodies. Cough. Even though Duque had already smashed the spirit into pieces, the two brothers could still clearly feel all the emotions contained in the soul fragments of their compatriots. It was a land that had been completely destroyed by depravity and destruction. Not a single blade of grass grew and the forests were scorched. It was a world without plants, a world where even herbivores could not survive. Without herbivores, there were naturally no large carnivores like bears or bear monsters. It was the fear of hunger, the desire to survive. The most primitive instincts of animals were gathered in the soul fragments and merged with the souls of the two demigods. The fusion continued. At some point in time the two demigods were already crying. Two incomparably huge bear-shaped existences were shedding silent tears. This was a very strange scene. But Duque felt that he could understand that feeling. If it were him, he would have to sacrifice tens of thousands of humans to ensure his own survival in order to protect more humans. It would definitely not be a good feeling. Soon, all the soul energy had been injected into the two demigods' spirit bodies. Next was the most thorough soul fusion. The two demigods closed their eyes at the same time as if they were asleep. Duque thought that this should not be a problem. Finally there was a long wait. 1 hour, 2 hours, a full 12 hours. Suddenly the two demigods' eyes widened in anger. They immediately began to absorb the elemental energy of the magical net. 10 seconds passed. Two earth-shattering crashing sounds resounded throughout the entire boulder hill. The terrifying earthquake caused Duque to fall into a trance. It was as if the deep rock continent had already connected with Azeroth in advance. The ground instantly split open and the zigzagged cracks extended in all directions. Then there was a sound. A wild, ancient sound that seemed to pierce the eardrums of all living beings in the surroundings. The primitive and barbaric bear race roared, announcing that they would tear apart all evil. It was just a roar, but the waves of air that swept past gave people the feeling of a raging storm. The two bears were as big as small fortresses and their eyes were the size of water tanks. They stared fiercely at Duque. Duke Marcus. Is your promise still valid? Facing the bear brothers' questioning, Duke's mouth curled up. Of course it's effective. As long as the alliance exists, the bear race will not go extinct. The bear monsters you protect will become the fourth vassal race of the alliance after the Murlocs, Nagas and the Karaji bug people. And I swear in the name of the demigod of Azeroth that once Sargeras is destroyed in the return of the Legion, I will release your souls and restore your freedom. A demigod's oath under the witness of the planet's will was naturally trustworthy. Feeling the faint echo from the planet's will, the grimacing bear brothers' expressions softened. Then in this period of time, please take care of us, Master. Hearing this, Duque finally breathed a sigh of relief. The two demigods who could bear the most damage among the god of the wilderness had finally been accepted as underlings. In theory, the one who could bear the most damage wasn't the bear brothers, but the tortoise god Tatora. The problem was that, he could bear it but he couldn't hold the enemy back. Unless the enemy was stupid, who would be so ruthless and risk their lives to knock on Totora's unparalleled titanium alloy tortoise shell? In any case, the turtle god's attack power was simply too weak. To put it bluntly, it couldn't kill many demons even if it was left alone. If it were Duque in command, he would only call a few elite demons to play with the tortoise god. Of course, if there was some gorilla god who repeatedly threw tot aura like a stone at the demons, that would be a different matter. While Duque was dealing with the bear brothers, good news came from Mount Hyjal. The wolf god Goldring and the crow god Avina had been resurrected. However, there was a new problem. Goldring seemed to be looking for trouble with Varian. Chapter 1798. When they arrived at the peak of Mount Hyjal, the descent of the Land of Fire had yet to be completed. Even though the atmosphere was tense, it still gave off a feeling that there was still plenty of time. Hence, there was a rather hilarious scene in the empty space beside the Nordrassil Inn at the highest point of Mount Hyjal. Tyrant, what's wrong? Why did you call me over in such a hurry? Duque hurriedly opened the teleportation portal with his bear brothers. Tyrant, who was dressed in a moon-white priest robe, seemed to be unable to maintain her dignified and noble temperament. She seemed to be possessed, or rather her tone had dropped. She covered her mouth and secretly pointed to the front. See for yourself. In the empty space, a huge white wolf pressed its front leg against William's armor, and half of its body stood upright. William, on the other hand, straightened his back and stared at Goldring's huge wolf eyes with determination. It felt as though he could press the tiny Varian to the ground with his huge wolf foot, putting on a show of planting a king in spring and reaping many more kings in autumn. If there was any danger, Brawl and Valilla would have been furious. Actually, it wasn't. The huge white wolf was naturally Goldrassil. A canine that didn't show its sharp claws wasn't considered hostile, at least. Their conversation made Duque dumbfounded, and he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Goldrassil opened his big mouth towards William, and his grayish-black nose was right in front of William's breastplate. Son. Call me Daddy. No. William was speechless. Do you believe that I'll eat you? No. A cross-shaped vein appeared on William's forehead. If you don't scream, are you trying to see if my teeth are sharp? Get lost. All right, 2 veins. If I didn't share some of my soul with you back then, you would have died under the hammer of misfortune. Goldrassil bared his teeth. I am William Rin, the son of the great Stormwind King Lang Rin. Goldrassil. I respect your contributions, but this doesn't mean that I'll accept being the son of a wolf. William's neck was already red, and it seemed like he was reaching his limit. What's so bad about becoming the son of a demigod? Goldring was a little angry. If my father Lang was a demigod, I would be very happy. But I am human. It's not a wolf. William said firmly. Acknowledging one's ancestors was, of course, acknowledging the ancestors of the human race. Why did he choose to be a beast instead of a decent human being? William had already considered the bigger picture by not fighting to the death on the spot. However, he did not know what the wolf was thinking. William's biggest mistake was to think of the wolf's thoughts as a human. On the other side, Tyrant poked the snickering Duque in the waist, finally waking him up. Tyrant wasn't the only one. Even the other 2 members of William's team were staring at Duque with resentment in their eyes. If Duke hadn't singled out William to capture him that day, there wouldn't have been so many problems. Duque glared at the two of them. That's right. Goldrassel's character was just that strange. As long as this fellow was completely resurrected, he would definitely look for William. William the ghost had inherited a part of Goldrassel's soul. In the eyes of the wolf god, this was even worse than his son. However, the matter still had to be resolved. Cough cough. Duque pretended to cough. In fact, Goldrassel had noticed Duque a long time ago. The purity of the elemental energy on Duque's body was like a human torch in the dark in Goldrassel's eyes. It was difficult not to see it. Duque, come quickly. Human. This is none of your business. This is a problem between me and my son. Who's your son? You. Duque suddenly attacked. He raised his hands horizontally with his palms facing downwards. The next moment the wolf god felt his body become extremely heavy. It was a heavy feeling that made it difficult for him to even lift a finger. The deceleration spell was not rare. The deceleration spell that could suppress a demigod was rather impressive. Almost at the same time, Goldrassel's lips that covered his teeth turned upwards, revealing a mouthful of crisscrossed sharp teeth. His body slightly arched, he was ready to attack. Regardless of the reason, he was ready to attack this meddlesome demigod. Duque smiled faintly. William, what god of the wilderness? To put it bluntly, it's just a beast that has ascended from the soul and body to the divine realm. Even if it speaks the human language, it's still a beast. Beast, just use the simplest method to make him understand your will. Let's fight. With your current strength. I'll make Goldrassel's strength fall to your level. William immediately realized that Duke's words made sense. He didn't waste any time and acted on his thoughts. He unsheathed his famous twin swords on the spot, and the dazzling radiance made Goldring squint his eyes. Want to fight? Very well. I'll lower my strength. Human demigod, don't meddle. After saying that, Goldrassel turned his huge wolf head. And William, if I defeat you, you'll have to call me Daddy. No. I'll tell you with my sword that you can forget about it forever. William was almost gnashing his teeth. William turned his left arm at lightning speed and that Shadow Ripper slashed towards Goldrassel's wolf claws. Wolves were never creatures that relied on strength. They were creatures that relied on agility. Goldrassel didn't care at first and was prepared to use his demigod body to take on William's sword. However, in the next second he realized that something was wrong. That abominable human demigod had actually expelled the elements in the surrounding space, causing his body's toughness to drop drastically. For a moment, Goldrassel wanted to attack Duque first. I'm Duke Marcus, the current Supreme Commander of the Alliance. I've said it before, I'll let you have a fair battle with William. Accompanied by Duque's mocking words, he displayed the strength of a top-tier demigod. Duque's insane deceleration spell actually reduced Goldrassel's speed to the level of a legendary hero. Duque wasn't a warlock, so he didn't have any weakening curse. Even if Goldrassel's speed was reduced, the wolf god's strength wouldn't change much. Moreover, the demigod body was still the demigod body. But this was enough for William. Even though it was a dual-wielding berserker, he still had the godly special skill, armor penetration. William didn't attack immediately. Instead, he swung his swords and gave Goldrassel 5 stacks of armor penetration. A man and a wolf fought fiercely in the open space next to the hotel. This battle could be said to be chaotic and gloomy. Tyrant frowned. Are we just going to let them fight like this? Duque shrugged. What can I do? When William lost his memory and became a slave gladiator, he accidentally picked up the wolf god's soul fragment and fused it perfectly. Who can we blame for this? Chapter 1799. The relationship between William and Goldring was King messed up. With the bloodline of the Rin family, it was already a blessing for him to be able to become a legendary hero. Goldring's soul fragment definitely played a big part in William's current battle prowess. But William couldn't possibly return to his roots and become a werewolf just because of that. That was why he was stuck in a dilemma. It was impossible for William to return the soul fragment. Duque had long discovered that Goldring's werewolf soul had merged perfectly with the violent version of William. At the same time, the cowardly version of William's soul represented the inheritance of the Rin family. Sometimes, Duque even had the evil thought of asking Xianxia to come over and split William into 2 again. One would be a demigod wolf prince and lead the werewolves. The other would be the king of Stormwind and continue to lead Stormwind. Of course this was just a thought. If he really did that, there would be nothing left for the old wolf King Jin. And the Stormwind Kingdom would also become a weak chicken, unable to recover from this setback. Duque shamelessly brought out beach chairs, popcorn and other snacks. Together with Tyrant and the rest, they watched the wolf and man vent their dissatisfaction and energy. Overall, William was at a disadvantage. Even though William trained himself to be very strong, the limits of a mortal were clear. As long as he didn't cross the boundary of the divine realm, his physical endurance was limited. Wolves were originally a race with good endurance. In order to hunt, they could chase their prey day and night without rest. Moreover, Duque's deceleration spell didn't weaken Goldring's physique. They fought and roared along the way. Goldring seemed to be stubborn. He preached along the way, bragging about his glorious history in ancient times. In general, it was that his papa was very powerful, that he was invincible in the wilderness of ancient Kalimdor, that he had beaten up demons, and that he was the vanguard of the god of the wilderness. At first, Falila and Brawl were quite nervous. Later, when they realized that William was at a disadvantage due to his lack of stamina, the shameless blood elf thief suggested that Duque continue to whittle away at Goldring's strength. Duque rolled his eyes. Why don't you just ask me to kill the wolf god? The wolf deity could accept fairness, but he absolutely could not accept being oppressed. Any more and he would fall out with them. In the end, it was Goldring who felt bored. I'm done. I'm not fighting anymore. I'll go back and think about how to teach your stone-headed son a lesson. I'm not your son. William rebuked the wolf god. If I say you are, then you are. I'm not. The story between the wolf god and Varian was more like a small interlude. As the Land of Fire began to fuse completely with Azeroth, no matter how eager he was to find his son, Goldring had no choice but to put aside his personal affairs and enter a state of battle. Whoa. 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 Looking from the northern foothills of Mount Hyjal to the southern foothills, every elf could see the sky filled with fire meteors falling in all directions. However, these terrifying fireballs grew larger and larger. When they flew closer to the northern foothills, they suddenly disappeared without a trace, as if it was an illusion. It's not an illusion. When the space of the Land of Fire fuses with Azeroth, these fireballs will really fly over, Duque said with certainty. Over the past few days, even when the Night Elf Sentinels were on break duty, they looked nervously at the world of fire in the south that was getting bigger and bigger. The only thing that could give them comfort was the flying city of Dalajan, which was hovering above the western side of Mount Hyjal. The alliance was as reliable as ever. They had sent their city of wizards and Duque was personally in charge. Only the elements could resist the elements. This was already the strongest combat force that the alliance could send out. On this day, the direction of the wind changed and a strong wind suddenly blew in the south. Some sentinels were already screaming. Fire! The fire is coming. The flames in the southern foothills are spreading towards us. Countless elves were alarmed. They rushed out and saw a strange scene that they would never forget in their lives. That was the true meaning of a prairie fire. Countless balls of fire seemed to spread endlessly towards the north, like the light of the rising sun chasing away the darkness. Even though Duque had ordered the alliance to use bulldozers and logging equipment to chop down a large number of trees, forcibly opening up a fire belt that was more than a kilometer wide between the southern and northern foothills, the fire was still spreading unreasonably. The fire continued to spread unreasonably. With a crackling sound, it spread across the mountainous area that was already devoid of green, devouring everything in its path. The short tree stumps became torches, and the scorched land that had already been stripped of grass was still burning away all the nutrients inside. Then the sea of fire passed through the fire belt and burned into the dense sea of trees at the northern foothills of Mount Hyjal. The towering trees fell one after another and countless leaves were ignited. They fell from the branches and before they could fall to the ground, they were already burned into ashes in midair. Countless sparks were swept up into the sky by the surging flames, and soon, a larger area of the forest was set ablaze, and the cycle started again. No. Our forest. Heavens, how is this any different from the Burning Legion? The night elves wept. Their tears flew into the distance along with their hair that danced wildly in the wind. Tyrant and Malfurion's faces were ashen. In the end, they could not revive the demigod Cenarius before the Land of Fire descended. We can only rely on Duque. Malfurion said in a low voice. Yes. Tyrande looked up at the majestic magic city in the sky, and her gaze turned from unease to determination. He has never disappointed me. In the Dalajan, Duque sat in the largest mage tower in the city. It was a mage tower that the Dalajan had specially built for him, the demigod of the weave. Duque might not even be able to stay in the Dalajan for a day in a year. Since Duque had made the Dalajan and Naxxramas one of the 3 most important nodes of the weave in Azeroth, he still had to build this mage tower properly. Sitting on the highest floor of his mage tower, Duque sat on a chair that was connected to the entire Dalajan city through a magic formation. In a sense, the Dalajan city was already Duque's private property, because the entire magic network of the city had been completely integrated into the weave. Duque gently raised his right hand and his finger drew a line in the air. I said, this is the border. Duque's seemingly simple whisper was clearly heard by every Dalajan mage. Even Kael, that's who was waiting by Duque's side, could not help but feel a chill in his heart. The entire Dalajan city lit up. The muzzle of the main cannon that had not been used for a long time suddenly lit up. It was not the bombardment of the main magic cannon, but it was better than the full power of the main cannon. The purple light that shot out from the muzzle easily tore the earth apart. From west to east, the entire Mount Hyjal was divided into 2 parts, north and south. It was a terrifying move that ended the surging of the elements, like a wall separating the earth from the earth. All the flames were isolated for no reason. They tumbled and surged, surging and surging. They even seemed to endlessly sweep high into the sky, wanting to break through the clouds and reach the horizon. In the end, not a single flame could surpass the boundary that Duque had drawn. Chapter 1800. This wasn't really splitting the mountain. The purple beam only penetrated about 1 meter into the ground at most. If Duque really split Mount Hyjal in half, even if it was to resist the Land of Fire, the elves would probably still be extremely resentful towards Duque. In fact, what Duque was really doing was to buffer the exchange of elements between Mount Hyjal and the Land of Fire. In a sense, the location where the beams split the ground became a new border between the 2 conflicting dimensions. If Duque hadn't gone through the battle at the Molten Core and obtained Ragnaros's share of control over the fire elements, the shock wave of the fire elements from the Land of Fire when the planes merged would all affect Duque, the leader. Bearing the escape of a large elemental plane wasn't something a human or demigod could do. Even the entire Dalajan couldn't succeed. Bearing the impact of such a huge amount of elemental energy in an instant, even if the entire Dalajan put up a magic shield with all its strength, the entire city would be torn apart in an instant. Having control over a portion of the fire elemental energy was an entirely different matter. Other than the fire elements that surged over involuntarily at first, the fire elements that were still rational immediately chose to listen to their master Duque's orders and began to escape to other places. Bastard! The angry roar of the fire demon King Ragnaros could be vaguely heard in the entire Land of Fire. With his roar, the fire elements that had just rushed into the sky and more fire elements inside the Land of Fire stirred again, ready to sweep over. Shut up, boozer. I said no one can come over. Duque's loud voice resounded in the world. The fire elements were instantly conflicted. Between the 2 bosses, one had the right to order them, so who should they listen to? I want this world to become purgatory. I want to burn everything in the world. Nothing can stop the descent of the flames. My slaves. Ragnaros urged the fire elementals. Attack my ass. Go back. Ragnaros is my loser. He has no right to come and fight with me for territory. Duque also roared. Flame elementals conflict degree plus 10,086. Duke Marcus, all you've done is defeat my clone. I will burn you to death. I will. The Balrog's anger seemed to have risen to another level. Hey, you're still so stubborn even after losing. In any case, I won. Duque retorted. I will use my flames to devour your soul. I'll make you wail under my throne for millions of years. You are my defeated opponent. You are my defeated opponent. No matter what Lager said, Duque would choke Lager to death with one sentence. You're my defeated opponent. In the end, even Duque himself felt that the 2 of them were like those trolls with an IQ of 50 on the internet before he transmigrated. Not only were they uncultured, but their insults were also meaningless. The mortals below had their horizons broadened. The Alliance soldiers, mainly made up of elves, were probably also wondering why the two demigods only knew how to talk and not fight a real battle. Actually, it was a little unfair. Although Duque and Ragnaros controlled a portion of the fire elemental plane and could use large amounts of fire elements at will, it seemed quite impressive. Few people would have thought that power and duty were closely linked. Plane fusion was not that simple. When planes collided, the spatial backlash that resulted had to be settled by the plane master. Ragnaros could not move at all now. He could only bitterly repair his own domain in the core of the Land of Fire. Although it was plane fusion, if he did not separate the Land of Fire from the Land of Azeroth, he would not be able to extract fire elements from the Land of Fire in the future. Moreover, to seize control of the fire elements of the entire Land of Azeroth, which was many times larger than the Land of Fire, would require incalculable time and energy. Logger could not move, and it was difficult for outsiders to enter because the space in the Land of Fire was not too stable. One mistake and they would fall into some spatial rift and be unable to come out. That would be laughable. This meant that it would be difficult for a king to fight against a king in the early stages. After finally ending the argument, Duque let out a long sigh of relief. Phew. It's finally done. Duque turned to Kale. I'll leave this place to you. Don't worry. Go and rest, Commander. Kale, bowed deeply. How many times have I told you, Kale? That's no need to be so polite. Duque's cheek muscles twitched. If you didn't protect me back then, I would have been a stray dog, Kale, said very seriously. All right, up to you. Duque shrugged, opened a portal and returned to the top of Mount Hyjal. Almost as soon as he came out, a white figure rushed up and kissed him without saying anything. Not bad. It was rare for Tyron to kiss someone so openly. Duque blinked and saw Malfurion, who had avoided his sight not far behind. For some reason, he felt that the great druid's hood made of lush green grass was very green. Duque, you're amazing. Only you can help us defend the sacred mountain, Tyron said excitedly. Duque could not understand the night elf's fanatical feelings for Mount Hyjal. Speaking of which, didn't he force the Arc Herons to explode once? The explosion of Mount Hyjal was just like opening a bag. It was a little painful the first time, but he got used to it the second time. In any case, the group of elves seemed to have ignored their high priest's treasonous act of kissing a human, and instead showered Duque with praises. Thank you, great demigod of the weave. You are the benefactor of all life on Mount Hyjal. In the end, even Malfurion, who seemed to have an unruly green grassland above his head, came up and bowed deeply to Duque. He said sincerely, "Thank you, Lord Marcus. Without you, the fire elements would have destroyed at least 100 miles to the north." All right. Since even Malfurion is thanking me. Duque did not hesitate to hug Tyron's waist in front of Malfurion. Malfurion's gaze flickered again. However, he seemed to sigh in his heart, and then looked straight at Duque and Tyron. Don't test me. Actually, I've accepted this fact a long time ago. Although I feel that you're too fickle. But Tyron's happiness is the most important. Bless you. The moon goddess also blesses you. Next, I will dedicate my soul and life to nature as a big druid. With that, Malfurion nodded and left without looking back. Perhaps he was crying, or perhaps he was crying from the bottom of his heart. Chapter 1801. Duque felt a little guilty towards an honest man like Malfurion. *T. Tyron raised her right hand as if she wanted to ask him to stay or say something, but in the end she lowered her arm dejectedly. In this life she and the Stormrage brothers were childhood friends, but fate had made her miss the two brothers. She snuggled into Duque's arms. Hey. After discussing with me, Goddess Elune announced that Chandrise will be the next saintess of the Elune Sisterhood. She also gave her blessings to you and me in the entire Elune Sisterhood. When you become a true god, I will serve you. I see. That's great. Duque finally understood why the elves would react this way when Tyron announced their relationship. Speaking of which, did Elune notice something? The cataclysm was a huge blow to the old world, and the ecology of the entire planet was severely affected. But staying the same meant that everything had to follow the prescribed order. Earth-shattering changes often brought destruction, but they also meant the arrival of a huge opportunity. As one of the few true gods in this world, Elune definitely knew something. Did the planet's consciousness finally open a VIP channel for the Guardians to rapidly increase their power? Or was it some other opportunity? Otherwise, There was no way to explain why Ilun would reveal the agreement they had made a long time ago. After all, a high priestess who was in love would definitely weaken the holy light on her body, and it would not be beneficial for Tyron to continue ruling the night elves. Announcing Chandris as the saintess at this time was a classic example of letting Chandris take over. Duque shook his head to get these questions out of his mind. Ilun was mysterious. She did not look for him directly, which meant that she was not willing to tell him. There was no point in looking for her. Duque decided to focus on this battle. To be honest, the early stage was really small. Because the space was unstable, the fire elementals that could rush out were the lowest level ones. How low were they? Only an earth mage's frost arrow could deal with it with Bayou. Elemental creatures were best dealt with elements. The fire elementals didn't have a physical body, so the elven sentinels and archers could only watch. Of course, Duke would not let them fight back. Almost every elf was equipped with Daoran's enchanted arrows and weapons such as ice weapon and the like. These weapons that used the ice element to deal damage to fire elemental creatures could indeed give mortals a chance to kill elemental creatures. But enchantments were simply too expensive. Icy weapon, which had a slight deceleration effect, would cost about 50 gold coins. Moreover, this was the real world, so the effects of the enchantment would not be the same. If he used it too harshly, the frost element would be consumed faster than the miniature magic array would absorb it. The enchantment might break. Therefore, the first round of resistance against the invasion of the fire elements became Pharaoh's task. No, it should be called a paradise for low-level mages. With Duque's 10 years of emphasis on wizard education and the fact that the weave had greatly reduced the difficulty for apprentices to become official wizards, the Alliance's pool of talented wizards was considerable. Unfortunately, there were not many opportunities for the mages to practice. How could there be so many live targets in the Dalajan? Most of the monsters in the wild were scattered. Sometimes they could not find a suitable target even if they ran all over the place. Either they were not strong or weak, or they were simply too strong and could not beat them. How could it be like now, where all the weakest fire elementals came out? In the game, this was a batch of level 10 to level 20 fire elementals. The Dalajan Pharaoh was energized. Where are the earth mages? Gather all the earth mages to practice. Sky mages are on standby. Morning star mages are ready to support. Tell that's ordered. Hence, no less than 20,000 earth mages and even high-ranked apprentices rushed to the various defensive lines of Mount Hyjal to help the night elves resist the invasion of the fire elementals. Don't worry about magic. As long as you can sense the weave and sign the treaty, there will definitely be enough ice elementals. Look at your spiritual force. If you feel dizzy, stop immediately. The mentors instructed their students. From the west to the east, the sound of ice arrows being shot could be heard everywhere on the battlefront that was almost 100 kilometers long. Prediction. Prediction of where to move. Fire elemental creatures are not targets that just stand there and wait for you to hit them. You have to predict their speed and direction and prepare for the attack. Damn it. If this was the era without the weave, you would not have had the chance to become official mages. You are the worst batch of students I have ever taught. The ancient and conservative night elves had never seen such an awesome large-scale actual combat exercise before. Towards the end, even the Cenarian circle could not sit still. Malfurion wrote a large number of words. Given that the new generation of druids are obsessed with spiritual training, their actual combat ability is too poor. All the low-ranked druids were pulled into actual combat exercises. As a result, there were scenes of low-level druids playing with starfire and moonfire in every camp. The spatial fusion continued. When the fire elementals rushing out of the land of fire started to appear in the mid-ranked, Duque added sky mages. Low-ranked against low-ranked, mid-ranked against mid-ranked. Practice. Continue practicing. Even if lives are lost, practice. If they did not practice today, they would have to use up a large number of lives in the future. It was very likely that only 1 out of 100 could become a high-ranked mage. While the Alliance was playing Pharaoh, the tribe was also launching an attack on the Twilight Fortress in the Great Rift Valley. Frankly speaking, the situation was not optimistic. The tribe was also seriously biased. Almost all of them were butcher teams. Not to mention Pharaoh, they did not even have many long-range mages. In the face of the Twilight Dragon army that constantly dived and bombed, or dived and spat dragon breath, the tribe could not come up with any good ideas. In addition to relying on the trolls' spears and the troll hunters' shooting, The more reliable thing was the goblin cannons. A certain Rustwater conglomerate's prince of trade really put in a lot of effort this time, pulling out hundreds of goblin cannons. They were not high-level goods, but black gunpowder cannons that had been abandoned by the Alliance. And they were King breeches. Any officer in the Alliance would probably burst out laughing if he saw this. Breeches and grape shot were the most effective anti-air firepower. In fact, it was only effective against the underage Twilight Dragons. Most of the real adult Twilight Dragons were transferred away by Neltharion, which avoided the embarrassment of the tribe. Every time the grape shot down a young Twilight Dragon, the tribe would burst into enthusiastic cheers. Of course, there would be a group of muscular men who would run to the ground to be dragon slayers. Except for the brainless roar, several of the tribe's big shots were sighing behind their backs. "Is Duque willing to help?" Kane asked. Woken was dispirited. He replied with 4 words, "None of my business." Chapter 1802. The relationship between the Horde and the Alliance was completely ruined. Apart from Wuxia, who could still talk to the Alliance, the two sides had almost closed all channels of negotiation. Who was to blame? From the day Garush came to power without inviting the leader of the Alliance, the relationship between the two sides had plummeted. First of all, Garush did not admit that the Horde and the Alliance owed money in commercial trade. He believed that the Alliance had greatly artificially lowered the price of ore in the trade, which was a shameless exploitation of the Horde. The Horde denied this kind of bad debt obtained through deception. Secondly, there were territorial disputes. The new oasis in the Desolace was indeed done by Fandral Stackhelm, but it was done in the name of the Cenarian Circle. Without a word, Garush ignored the opposition of the Tauran druid Hamuir Runtotem, and even threatened Hamuir to label him as a traitor, and ordered the tribes in the Desolace to attack. Hamuir had informed the Night Elf druids to evacuate ahead of time, thus avoiding a direct war with the Night Elves. But in Grey Valley, Garush claimed that the Horde had the right to cut wood. Taking advantage of the Elves' retreat to prepare for the arrival of the Land of Fire, he sent people into Grey Valley to cut wood, preparing to rebuild Orgrimmar City. If this was not a slap in the face, what was? In order to appease the Elves, the Alliance had to cut wood from the Elven forest and send it over. Now the Horde was taking advantage of this? Who gave you the courage to do this? Wuxia, Kane, and even a group of big bosses including Dranos advised Braindead Roar not to act rashly, but Braindead Roar did not listen. "You have a problem? Sure. Follow me, Makra." Braindead Roar, with his veins bulging and his neck red, looked like he would never talk to anyone nicely. But this was very popular with the soldiers and the people. Most of the orcs agreed with his ascension to the position of Great Chief, thinking that his straightforward warrior instincts and unwillingness to negotiate were the true character of the orcs. Garush was grateful for the orcs' recognition and wanted these green-skinned orcs to accept him, but he did not have the time and patience to show his leadership style. He ordered the attack on the Twilight Fortress in the Barren Lands, which was a nightmare in the eyes of those with a bit of brain. Because, wherever the disaster was the most serious, people would be sent to the front line first. Charge. Lockendufi. Once upon a time, this oasis that suddenly appeared in the Barren Lands due to the cataclysm was like the final salvation in despair. As the Twilight Fortress rose from the ground, everything changed. It was originally a mountain that rose abruptly from the ground due to the fission of the earth. After the Twilight Believers occupied this place, they used earth magic from the deep rock continent to drill through the mountain and enslave the new believers who came from all directions to further strengthen the fortress. In this dim highland the shadows were even darker. The sun and the rest of the Azeroth seemed out of reach. The elemental creatures wandering around the Twilight Fortress were even more boastful. The fireworks will burn even brighter. The torrential rain will strike the earth. The violent tremors of the earth will tear the entire ground apart. Their existence deeply inspired or perhaps bewitched the shallow believers who had not yet fully believed in the destruction of the world. When the Horde army attacked Twilight Fortress, the orcs, Tauren, and trolls of the Horde often encountered their own people who had fallen into madness. After raising the butcher's knife to their former compatriots and being stained with blood, the Horde warriors had to face the elemental creatures with the most primitive swords without any support, who were almost immune to physical attacks. This was simply playing with the lives of the soldiers. How could a stone axe tied to a piece of wood deal with a 5-meter-tall earth elemental giant that had a ton of impact with a casual punch? Or could it kill a fire elemental creature whose entire body was made up of fire elements? The Horde warriors were heroic, but their deaths were worthless. However, Gurus kept throwing more troops into the siege. Whichever territory was the most chaotic, the whole family of that territory would be pulled into the battlefield. My father is a great warrior. So is my mother. The brave orc warriors don't discriminate between men and women, Brainless Roar roared. Female orcs were also very good at fighting. This was an orc tradition. Just like Sal's parents, Durotan and Draka, they were also famous for their fighting skills. In this way, Brainless Roar threw all the refugees into a war that was bound to be lost. This scene made Wajin and the other leaders tremble. Because of the cataclysm, the necessities of life are increasingly scarce. The Alliance has stopped importing food? It doesn't matter. In the name of righteousness, we can reduce the population through war. One must know that Sal's goal has always been to make the Horde bigger and stronger, constantly providing living resources for the people to live and reproduce. Gurus did the opposite. If there were not enough resources, then expand or consume the population through war. What made the leaders even more disappointed was that the traditional orcs actually approved of this approach. Orcs that will die on the battlefield because they are not fierce enough. Orcs that are not fierce enough are trash. You deserve to die. These crude and barbaric ideas run through the ideas of the traditional orcs, who accounted for the majority of the Horde's population. Oh my god. Gurus is actually consuming the Horde's population and war potential by doing this. Wajin was about to collapse. The most unbearable thing for the leaders was that Gurus was frantically pressuring them to send more troops. Our orcs have already lost 100,000 people. You trolls and Tauren have the nerve to send so few troops? Compared with the orcs who boasted of strength in numbers, the Tauren and trolls' population base was too small. The Tauren because the grasslands of Mulgore could only support so many people. The trolls because the Darkspear trolls had a small population. After joining the Horde, whether it was Kane or Wajin, they were not stingy with their warriors. There was no ambiguity in the sacrifices that should be made. That wasn't a sacrificial method either. It was completely using one's own soldiers to offset the enemy's resources, or even munitions. In the eyes of Gurus, it was as if the orcs had lost 100,000 people, and the trolls and Tauren should also have lost 10,000 people. This kind of unreasonable tactic simply drove Kane and Wajin crazy. Even the goblin trade prince Garavix, who did not take human life as a life, was indignant at Gurus's wasteful practice of human life. Because along with human life there was also his money. The twilight dragon soaring in the sky was simply the biggest nightmare of the Horde. Wajin finally couldn't help but say, Gurus, we can't go on like this. If we don't deal with those big lizards in the sky, it will be meaningless for you to send in all the warriors of the Horde. Chapter 1803. No. The death of the warriors is meaningful. Gurus showed an extremely tough side. With a wave of his hand, a female Tauren appeared. Magatha? It's you? Kane's face showed a little displeasure. Magatha Grim Totem. On the surface, this female Tauren shaman was committed to researching ways to turn the Forsaken back into living people. At the same time, she also served as an important advisor to Kane Bloodhoof, but in fact she was a typical hawk in the tribe. What was even less known was that she had always wanted to see Kane die. Before Kane unified the entire Tauren tribe and led them to Thundercliff to settle down, Magatha had already achieved power in her tribe. As a treacherous and powerful shaman and an extremely biased leader, Magatha had never fully accepted Kane as the chief of all the Tauren, nor did she believe that the Bloodhoof tribe could truly fight for the well-being of all the Tauren and unite them together. Although no one could deny her strength, her wisdom and her erudition, no one was willing to obey her will except those of her own tribe. Kane brought her to Thundercliff in order to monitor her every move and control the spread of the Grim Totem clan's influence. Now Kane was dissatisfied that she had actually mixed up with Gurus behind his back. Magatha saluted Kane and then said to everyone, "The enemy has been paralyzed. They think that the tribe is just a group of weak bugs that they can slaughter. Wing of Death has just transferred 90% of the Twilight Dragons. They must have gone to deal with the Sleeping Dragon Temple and the Alliance." Wajin, Kane and Dranusha's hearts fell to the bottom at the same time. Up to this moment the tribe had sacrificed 200,000 people. These 200,000 fresh lives were just for the sake of causing trouble, and then creating an opportunity for the tribe to attack the Twilight Fortress? How cold and cruel was this? If Gurus was only cold and cruel, then when he mixed up with the insidious and cunning Magatha, the effect was not 1 + 1 = 2. Gurus' rough face showed a smile of victory. What are you waiting for? Prepare to launch an all-out attack. That guy Gruul can't wait. As everyone knew, Sal and Gruul did not see eye to eye. Unexpectedly, when Gurush came to power, Gruul, the irascible guy, became like him. Leave it to me and my little brat. Ever since he came to Azeroth, Gruul could be considered to have a big heart and fat body. He slapped a few female Gorons and raised a few more smashes. The demigod monster Gruul's method of reproduction was very strange. It was more like the division of some kind of power than a normal pregnancy. Within a year, the smallest ones had grown to the same size as their older brothers. Their battle prowess was about the same. On this day, in the eyes of the Twilight believers, the Horde came to die again. The green tide that covered the mountains and plains rushed over, but it was a pity that it would crowd together at a few mountain passes. It was a perfect opportunity for the Twilight Dragon to unleash a round of dragon breath and wipe them all out. These days there were simply too many orc corpses. The Twilight Dragon didn't even need to go out to look for food. Every day after the battle it would fly down and devour fresh corpses. It was like a pattern of attack, and the Twilight Dragons didn't feel anything wrong. But when nearly 100 Twilight Dragons began to glide close to the ground and entered the state of swooping dragon breath, the scene in front of them suddenly changed. In their field of vision, more than 100 huge humanoid creatures broke into their field of vision without warning. They couldn't tell what was an illusion and what was real. Instinctively they launched an attack on the big guys. Whoosh! The violent flames scorched the ground. The orcs that were burned by the flames immediately turned into humanoid torches, wailing and running. After a few moments they fell to the ground and twitched and then died easily as usual. But these huge humanoid monsters with rock-wrapped skin were not afraid of the Twilight Dragon's flames at all, showing a mobility beyond the imagination of the dragons. Some of them smashed out huge rocks the size of tanks. Some of them jumped 30 to 40 meters into the air and hugged the flying dragons. They fell to the ground together with the dragons with strange purplish-blue scales and wrestled with each other. The two largest adult dragons stared at Gruul, who was the largest of them all. They also directly served him with flames. Gruul, who was the size of a small mountain, showed agility that was not commensurate with his huge body. He made a sideways movement. Just by standing with his front and back legs, two blazing dragon breaths brushed past him. Behind him, there was a series of explosions that sounded like raging flames on the prairie. The dazzling light of the dragon breath made the surrounding mortals squint their eyes. Only Gruul ignored the shockwave caused by the explosion, and his whole body shot into the sky like a cannonball. The two Twilight Dragons opened their mouths angrily, raised their claws, flapped their wings and attacked Gruul from the left and right. However, the unimaginable double acceleration allowed Gruul to pass between the two dragons' mouths and claws. Although it was not a direct hit, the left side of his neck, right arm and left side of his waist were opened by the dragon claws. There was no blood, because Gollin was a half-stone half-creature. The fatal wound in the eyes of others was just a superficial wound on Gollin. Instead, Gruul grabbed the necks of the two dragons when he passed by. Roar! The two dragons were thrown to the ground with their bellies facing the sky. Just as they were dizzy from the fall, Gruul made a very exaggerated move. He actually connected the necks of the two Twilight Dragons and tied a dead knot. The scene was very strange. The powerful dragons that had been wantonly slaughtering the tribal warriors these days became ridiculous toys in front of Gruul, an ancient demigod beast. Gruul stepped on the shoulder of a dragon and pulled the other dragon away with his hand. Because their necks were tied, the dragons began to lack oxygen, and their struggles became weaker and weaker. In the end, when the dragon's neck was pulled to the extreme, it exceeded the limit. Puff! The neck of the first Twilight Dragon was forcibly torn off. Gruul did not let the other one go. He directly used his giant claws to tear off the dragon's neck that was still connected to the other dragon's neck. Blood immediately sprayed out from the 4 gaping wounds, forming a series of fountains in midair, blood fountains. Ha! Waha! Gruul looked up to the sky and laughed. His laughter was the main melody of today's battle. Chapter 1804. With the demigod behemoth as the vanguard, the Horde finally charged into the Twilight Fortress. Receiving the news, Duque wasn't surprised at all. He even wanted to laugh. He laughed whenever he wanted to. Ha ha ha. Duque forgot that he was video chatting with Jaina through the magic mirror. Oh, it was a video conference. What's so funny? Jaina rested her chin on her hand, looking bored. After all, the Horde had gathered all its forces to attack the Twilight Fortress, leaving Theramore alone. Nothing. I'm laughing at the fact that Brainless Roar wants to divide the Horde while gathering all the masters of the Horde to deal with a beginner-level opponent. Duque was amused. Duque was right. According to the rules of World of Warcraft, every time a big event happened, there would be a beginner-level dungeon for the players to practice. Although the beginner-level dungeon Twilight Fortress was the most difficult among all the previous dungeons, it was still a beginner-level dungeon. As for the title Brainless Roar, Duque had spread among the higher-ups of the Alliance since he often let it slip. Grom Hellroar was known as Lord Roar. It was ironic that his son was called Brainless Roar when he smashed Gurus. It proved the general rule that like father like son like son. Frustrated, Lord Roar went to Duque and said, "I'm me and my son is my son. If one day you want me to fight with my son and he's worthy of my efforts, I won't hesitate." Duque had to admire Lord Roar's unparalleled loyalty. Lord Roar was a real man who wasn't good with words. He didn't know how to teach people and was better at doing things directly. Once he did it, it was up to others how much others learned. One stayed in Azeroth to fight as a guerrilla, while the other stayed in Nagran to be an otaku. The two of them had lost contact with each other for so many years, so it was inevitable that the son would turn bad and pick up bad habits. In fact, even Grom himself saw that something was wrong. Both he and Duque had the same unspoken red line in their minds. The Horde couldn't attack the Alliance. If Gurus declared war, they would have to take action. To be honest, Duque was very free these days. He was waiting for the last traitor to appear. On this day the sun went down. The constant cycle of the sun and the moon made the moonlight woodland once again fall into that kind of quiet and peaceful atmosphere. The water vapor rising from the surface of the moon god lake mixed with the natural aura that permeated the air, causing the entire forest to seem to be enveloped in a layer of green gauze. The battle at Mount Hygel hundreds of kilometers to the south did not affect this place at all. Apart from the addition of a few more guards, the atmosphere was still quiet. An extremely secretive aura enveloped a graceful female figure. She walked alone on a small path in the forest. The guards who passed by ignored her. After a few turns, she arrived in front of a treehouse. "Open the door." A crisp female voice rang out. The eyes of the elven guards were misty, and they revealed respectful expressions. "You're here? Lord Malfurion. Why didn't we get the report?" "I'm the report." The female elf's voice was proud. "Open the door. I want to see Fandral." In the ears of the guards there was no problem at all. Two elven druids operated the spell formation and opened the door. The circular door, which was originally tightly sealed by countless vines, quickly opened because the vines retreated like snakes. The female elf walked with graceful steps down the stairs slowly and entered the basement where Fandral Staghelm was imprisoned. "In accordance with the orders of the Great Master Enzoth, I'm here to pick you up, Lord Fandral Staghelm." The female elf leisurely bowed to Fandral. "After Enzoth abandoned me and Savi's, he suddenly thought of me, a discarded chess piece?" The corner of Fandral's mouth raised, revealing a mocking smile. Sensing that Fandral's mood was not right, the female elf hurriedly said, "Master did not abandon you. In fact, Enzoth is going to lose." Fandral's confident words made the female elf feel uneasy for the first time. "Ah!" The female elf suddenly let out a scream. She jumped forward a big step, completed a 180-degree turn in the air, and pulled out a series of movements such as two swords. Then she saw the three people who had silently appeared behind her. Her heart instantly sank to the deepest part of the ice abyss. Duke Marcus, Isra and Malfurion. Apart from Tyrant, almost all the big shots that she did not want to meet had appeared. Duque laughed. "Fandral Staghelm is one of the few strong people in Caldorii. Do you think that we would simply put him under house arrest and not take any precautions?" At this moment the humanoid Isra suddenly took a step forward. Her face was clearly sullen. "Alice Razor. Why is this happening?" The female elf was suddenly shocked. The shock and fear on her face froze for more than 3 seconds before her expression became extremely ugly. "As expected. Have you found out? If it was an ordinary infiltrator or traitor, Duque would definitely not alarm Isra and let the great Emerald Dragon Queen come here. This Alice Razor had an identity that outsiders could not imagine. She was an ancient dragon of the Green Dragon Army. If possible, it was best to clean up traitors themselves. Outsiders forcibly cleaning up traitors on their behalf was a serious form of disrespect. The next second, the female elf opened her red lips, and a powerful sound wave mixed with natural elements and wind magic suddenly spread in the not-so-small basement. Wah, it sounded a little like a girl's cry. In reality, it was even more ear-piercing and difficult to accept. However, an attack of this level could not be effective. Alice Razor herself knew that. Almost at the same time as she roared, her entire body rose from the ground and slammed into the ceiling of the basement. She directly smashed through the thick rock layer and the exaggerated compound magic array, broke through the surface and flew into the air. In a short 3 seconds, she finally used the ultimate transformation spell and changed from a small elf to her dragon form. However, Isra was faster. She quickly turned into a dragon and hovered diagonally below Alice Razor. The dragon aspect was even larger and more beautiful than its opponent. It was as if every scale on its body was made of jade or glass. It didn't waste any more words. With a roar, it spread its green wings and began to fight. The atmosphere of the entire moonlight forest trembled slightly. Isra shot into the air like a sharp arrow, heading straight for Alice Razor. The wind pressure produced by the flapping of the giant green wings almost blew away all the leaves on the surrounding branches. Even though Isra also cherished every blade of grass and tree in the moonlight forest, in order to drive the traitor out of the moonlight forest, she had no choice but to set off a terrifying storm in a small area. Chapter 1805. Apart from the ancient trees of war and the ancient trees of wisdom, which were beyond the scope of ordinary trees, all the ordinary trees were blown away by the storm. All the trees that were shorter than 2 people hugging each other were uprooted. The buildings with the typical elven style all disintegrated into countless pieces, like a lovelorn woman tearing apart all the love letters that a man had given her, and they scattered in the wind. He didn't know why, but beautiful things still gave people a sense of beauty when they were in battle. The 2 dragons collided in midair, and at that moment the entire sky bloomed with a green glow. It wasn't just a physical battle at the top of the food chain, but also a spiritual battle that mortals couldn't imagine. It was a pity that the battle ended as quickly as it started. The battle in midair was decided in just 5 minutes. Be it in terms of size or spiritual attack strength, Alice Razor was at a disadvantage in all aspects. As Cenarius' adoptive mother, Isra was extremely familiar with the terrain and elemental distribution of the moonlight woodland. It could be said that Isra had the advantage of the right time, place and people. A series of 4 claws and dragon tail attacks made the traitor flustered, and a strong spiritual shock wave similar to Mind Blast caused the traitor's thinking speed to decrease rapidly. Alice Razor finally couldn't hold on any longer, and her movements clearly slowed down for a moment. The massive Emerald Guardian WM seized the opportunity, dodged and performed an aerial combat maneuver similar to Engerman's spin. After twisting its body in midair, it swooped down and grabbed the traitor's shoulder and neck near the dragon's head. "Sleep forever, my friend. My friend." Isra's soft voice was the final judgment. There were no wounds or pain. It was more like an exile of the soul. Duque could clearly see Alice Razor's soul floating away from her body. Her soul and dragon body had been separated forever. The next second, a beautiful emerald energy ball appeared in the sky and contained the soul that had become beautiful again. The soul that had been purified might very well become a part of the emerald dream forever. The dragon body that had lost its soul slowly descended under the support of a mysterious power. She was even coiled up nicely as if she had just fallen into a deep sleep. A beautiful death. An ending without any regrets. Duque let out a long sigh and looked down the hole. There Malfurion tried to persuade Fandral one last time. "Are you still unwilling to wake up?" Fandral shook his head calmly. "I'm very disappointed in this world. If it weren't for my granddaughter, I must admit that I would have thrown myself into the cause of world destruction. Take good care of her for me, this is my last wish. Of course, if you are still afraid that I will betray you, you can kill me. I have no complaints." Malfurion pursed his lips and bit them so hard that they almost bled. His hand gripped the staff tightly, and the protruding veins showed the struggle in his heart. If he killed Fandral, it would put an end to everything. But would he be able to forgive himself in the long years to come? After several hesitations, Malfurion finally made the decision. I have to take responsibility for my own mistakes. My brother, Illidan Stormrage, was sentenced to 10,000 years in prison for killing his brethren. After he came out, he committed an even greater crime, so he will be imprisoned again. Malfurion pointed at his disciple. You too. I can't do anything for you anymore. I only hope that one day you will find your own salvation. With that, Malfurion chanted a spell and sealed the broken underground prison. He ordered the elven warden who had heard the news, transfer him to Maeve Shadowsong. In the sky, Isra returned to his human form and slowly descended to Duque's side. Even though he had successfully taken care of the traitor, there was only a faint sadness on Isra's face. Thank you, Duque. Please forgive me. I really can't be happy. That's natural. No one would feel good after this. Duque comforted Isra. Do you know? I believe that fate is with you. Duque lowered his head. Fate is only with justice and truth. You're too humble. Isra did something that surprised Duque. She stepped forward and hugged Duque firmly. She even moved closer to Duque's ear and said in her soft voice, "In the dream that fate revealed to me, I saw a tragic future. That is the end of the dragon aspects and the end of us brothers and sisters. The only one left in the future is Alexstrasza. If this is my fate, then can you reverse mine?" Duque shuddered. He did not know how to answer. The Titans had given the 5 dragon aspects magical powers that surpassed most creatures in the mortal world. It was difficult for Duque to comment on this kind of prophetic dream, but he could faintly sense a trace of unwillingness and regret in Isra's tone. As if comforting Isra, Duque gently wrapped his hands around Isra's shoulders and let his body heat pass over. The reason why mortals praise heroes and their greatness is because heroes reverse the inevitable fate of destruction and death. If everything in the world is already predetermined by fate, then what's the point of hard work for mortals and demigods? Someone once said to me, if you never forget it, there will be an echo. So, having confidence may not necessarily win, but without confidence you will definitely lose. If we don't work hard, then we can't talk about victory or even reversing fate. As soon as Duque finished speaking, he felt a bit of moisture in his chest. What if Isra was crying? Isra said softly, what if, with just one's own hard work, no matter how hard you try, you still can't escape the cycle of destruction? You don't have to lie to me. Nosdorm obviously knows something he's already... Duque's heart skipped a beat. He could faintly feel the shift in fate, but he was not too sure and did not know if he should spoil Isra. He took a deep breath and finally said, if at the very end, you are sure that you can't escape the shackles of fate with just your own hard work, then you might as well give your fate to someone you can trust. Let him do things that you might not be able to do. For example, like Onyxia giving your fate completely to you? Isra raised his head and opened his eyes slightly, revealing a pair of psychedelic eyes. Duque said righteously, I don't deny that's a good idea. Chapter 1806. Isra suddenly smiled. It was a mysterious smile. Perhaps it was a smile of approval? Or did it have a special meaning? Isra did not comment on Duque's matter-of-fact answer. She smiled and asked, do all human males desire to possess everything? Duque was now a thinker and theorist. I can't deny that greed and the impulse to turn fantasies into reality is also one of the driving forces that push human society forward. But Duque changed the topic. In fact, I care more about what I have. My power, my lover, my family, my friends, and my subordinates. Isra's beautiful eyes flashed. If that's the case, how are you different from those ambitious ancient gods who desire to occupy all of Azeroth? Duque boasted shamelessly. If there's a difference, it's that I don't mind sharing this beautiful world with more beings. I think that the world is very big, and other than the Burning Legion and those damned ancient gods, there are no species that cannot coexist. And I will protect everything I have and save the world at the same time. Isra smiled brightly. The smile seemed a little sly, but Duque felt that the smile was very pure and beautiful. It was like the first time he met Princess Kalia. Isra seemed to be thinking, her left index finger pointing at her delicate face. She looked distressed. The human way of thinking is indeed a little difficult to understand. But it's considered qualified. Qualified? What qualified? Duque was still a little confused. Duque did not even realize that he had fallen into a trap. In the system notification 3 minutes ago, there was a clear line of words. Host, you have suffered an unknown mental attack from Isra, human. Since the host has defined Isra as a firm ally, the host has automatically given up resisting this mental attack. You have the truth special effect. In the next 3 minutes, everything you say will be true. Duque was still blinking like a dumb goose. Isra began to close her eyes. She smiled, and this time her smile was really bright. The power of the gods will eventually disappear completely, and mortals will begin to control the fate of the world. I used to wonder if it was appropriate to leave fate to mortals. But now it seemed that it was worth a gamble. All right, Duque, if I really have nowhere else to go, I will consider relying on you. I look forward to that day. Isra left, leaving Duque in a daze. By the time Duque was back to himself, Malfurion had already approached him. King Isra has left? Let's go. Right? Malfurion was also stunned by Duque's incoherent answer. Mr. Marcus, are you all right? I'm okay. Duque patted his face and tried to recall what had just happened. It seemed like his memory was a little blurry. Fortunately, he still had the system genie, which he put down in the system high speed. Duque finally knew what he had just done. He almost broke out in cold sweat on the spot. Holy shit. Isra set me up without saying a word? In Duque's heart, tens of thousands of alpacas were galloping wildly. No. Duque immediately chanted in his heart, System Genie. Strengthen the mental defense immediately. Forbid any form of mental peeping and hypnosis. From this moment on, all spells cast on me by friendly beings must be given to me. I will only accept them after my judgment. Understood. Duque exclaimed in his heart. That was close. I almost exposed my identity as a transmigrator. After the shock in his heart subsided, Duque finally turned around. Malfurion, I'm fine. What's the matter? Malfurion said solemnly, the fire elementals that escaped from the Land of Fire have been blocked at the front line of Mount Hyjal, but there have been many forest fires in the direction of Grey Valley and Fellwood Forest. Thank the Alliance for putting out the fires through artificial rain. I just want to ask, when can we fight Ragnaros? Fight. Duque looked into the distance. There was nothing he could do about waiting, but the instability of the space also meant that whoever wanted to stabilize the space in advance would have to work extra hard. Who is in a hurry now? Definitely not the Alliance. No. Wait. Duque suddenly shivered. He suddenly thought of a possibility. Why did the fusion of the Land of Fire and the Azeroth feel a bit slow? Duque's face darkened on the spot. Malfurion, wait. Atish appeared in his hand at once. As soon as the artifact staff hit the ground, a portal immediately opened. In the middle of the blue portal frame was a world of crimson flames. With a thought from Duque, a flame phantom appeared out of thin air in front of the two of them. It swayed its long red and black tail and quickly rushed into the Land of Fire. Duque, who had attached his telepathic thoughts to it, greedily used this phantom clone to absorb all the data around him. Lines of data poured down from Duque's retina. Space stability, 62. 375%. Elemental ratio, 72% fire, 20% earth, 8% wind. Fire elemental ratio, 78% in this world, 22% in Azeroth. Seeing this, Duque didn't want to watch anymore. At this time he finally understood why the fusion of Ragnaros' Land of Fire was so slow. It was slow enough for the Alliance to recruit a lot of novice mages to train. The Alliance was already so obvious, so why would Ragnaros let it go? If he was as hot-tempered as he was in the past, he would probably have hurriedly stabilized the space and rushed out. In the end, Ragnaros' actions had a lot to do with Du Zhe changing history. According to history, Ragnaros was defeated by the heroes of the mortal world in the Molten Core, but it wouldn't really hurt him. Because it was a clone, even if it was defeated, the divinity would return to the original body. Duque's approach was completely different. He didn't just demolish the house, he also confiscated it. Back then he even stole the divinity of Ragnaros' clone. No matter how hot-tempered Ragnaros was, he would definitely be extremely vigilant against a guy who really stole his divinity and even kidnapped his subordinates. In addition, the cataclysm this time was ultimately led by Enzos, the ancient god. Although Ragnaros was obsessed with the grand goal of destroying the world, he was still very careful when facing his old rival Duque. The biggest flaw was the ratio of the fire elemental. The fire elemental was not like the wind that could be seen everywhere. The wind would drift everywhere but the fire would not. How many fire elemental elements were there in the entire world? Where was the largest fire elemental element? The answer was obvious. The ratio of fire elemental elements was not high, and most of them were under the Earth's crust. So, during this period Ragnaros had actually been secretly extracting Azeroth lava. Chapter 1807. In other words, Ragnaros had purposely stabilized the space in the Land of Fire to a certain extent and then left it alone. The world itself had the ability to repair itself. If it could not resist the integration of the Land of Fire, which had a close relationship with the main world, then it would change from resisting to accepting. Even if Ragnaros did not rush the integration of the space, Azeroth itself would incorporate the Land of Fire into the map of the world. This was why the Alliance could leisurely train their troops, and the number of fire elemental creatures that emerged from the Land of Fire increased steadily. After thinking this through, Duque was a little exasperated. Faster thief. You hit a snake all year round and get bitten once in a while. He had always used his transmigrator memories to trick people and finally he had almost been tricked instead. Duque felt a little embarrassed and angry. It was no wonder. His impression of Ragnaros had always been a very violent and fierce man. Who would have thought that a fellow like fierce Zhang Fei would be so scheming? As expected, with N'Zoth around, did the Fire Demon King who had never been afraid also learn bad things? The only good thing was that it was not too late. Duque put one hand on Malfurion's shoulder and sighed. The space in the Land of Fire is not too stable yet. But considering that the Night Elves may suffer further losses, I agree to hold a throne meeting to discuss the matter of attacking the Land of Fire in advance. Thank you so much. Malfurion was so touched that he was crying. He did not know that there would be so many twists and turns when Duque sent a phantom over. He simply thought that it was to test the stability of the space. Who knew that if they did not attack first, Duque would have to face the Fire Demon King who had recovered and gained control of part of the fire element of Azeroth and had become even more powerful. For Duque, whether it was the Fire Demon King Ragnaros or the Tide Hunter Neptulin, their divinity was something that Duque had in mind. If one wanted to break into the true divinity realm, arcana, fire, and ice elements were the absolute foundation. Anyone who dared to compete with Duque would be attacked by Duque. Just as Duque held an emergency throne meeting to discuss how to kill Ragnaros, the Horde's attack on the Twilight Fortress reached its most brutal stage. If they were attacking other targets, the tribe might compromise. They might even choose to give up after suffering heavy losses, just like when they attacked the Scourge army last time. However, traitors were not to be tolerated. Around the Twilight Fortress, it was literally a river of blood, a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. In order to take down Gujar, the traitor, even Garush, the great Orsist, allowed the Forsaken of Drinos to resurrect the corpses to produce more Forsaken to join the war. The Twilight Fortress was indeed invaded. After the invasion, the tribe found that the Twilight Fortress was a fake, natural maze. There was even a part of it that was connected to the Deep Rock continent. The Dragon Slayer Gruul was hit as soon as he entered. The cunning twin-headed ogre Gujar dug a hole for Gruul. Gruul fell directly into a subspace between the Deep Rock continent and Azeroth. The sharpest arrow of the Horde was taken care of. The battle once again fell into a tug-of-war. Gujar summoned a large number of earth elemental creatures and built the interior of the Twilight Fortress with many twists and turns. Every day the terrain would change to different degrees. This damned fortress had become a flesh mill, greedily devouring the lives of the Horde. The only fortunate thing was that there was no longer a Lich King. The Horde mistakenly believed the news of the Alliance. All the resurrected soldiers were the Forsaken, not the damned Scourge army. This reduced the losses of the Horde. Even so, the Horde still lost more than 400,000 people in the continuous attacks. 300,000 of them were orcs, while 100,000 were Taurens, trolls, Forsaken, and a small number of goblins. For the orcs, who had a total population of more than 2 million, this loss was indeed a huge blow. For the other races, it was a heavy blow to the extent of almost extermination. The Taurens and Darkspear trolls were small races with a population of about 100,000. More than 30,000 people had died and more than half of the young men had been buried. These days the faces of Cain and Wujin were all black. When they suggested to Garrush that their race had no soldiers, Garrush said, "At the critical moment of the Horde's elimination of the traitors, you actually say that you won't send troops. Sure. But I will regard this move as a shameless betrayal of the Horde." Unknowingly, the other races of the Horde had already hated Garrush. They were just waiting for an explosive point to appear. At the same time, the Alliance hero group led by Duque, together with the demigods of the Guardians of Hyjal, killed their way into the Land of Fire. This time the Alliance army had lost many old faces. This was a helpless choice. The Blood Elf powerhouses led by Queen Sylvanas all went to attack the Wind God throne. Vasht's navy ran to Vasht. Muradin wanted to stay behind to integrate the power of the dwarf's 3 hammers. Jaina and Onyxia stayed behind in Theramore to guard against the brainless roar. Originally, the threat of the Horde at the moment was not great, but normal people could never expect to use their own mentality to measure the actions of a lunatic and mentally retarded, especially when that brainless person was still the great chieftain of the Horde. The two of them could only stay behind. The former Alliance hero group now looked more like 2 or 3 kittens. The decrease in numbers did not mean a decrease in quality. On the contrary, this time the powerhouses were dazzling to the point of blinding. Not to mention the genuine weave demigod Duque. This time there were half a dozen demigods fighting. The demigod bear brothers, the tortoise god Tatora, the raven god Iverna, the newly resurrected Cenarius, and a troublesome wolf god. Originally, Duque had planned to leave William and the other 2 who could take charge on their own, to guard against the Twilight believers who would appear out of nowhere. Who knew that Goldrin would drag William along with him no matter what? My son, Smash, is only temporarily blinded by his secular bloodline. As long as he fully understands how strong and fit I am, he will willingly kneel before my claws and call me father. When the big white wolf Goldring said this, his meow face actually had a slight blush. What made him so confident that William would bow down to him like a fan? Linley didn't know. In any case, Duque did not understand the world of wolves. Originally, William firmly refused, thinking that there was no need for him. Duque and the others would be able to criticize Ragnaros 1,000,000 times over. However, the Night Elves tacitly accepted Cenarius, the Great King, moved William with emotion and reason, saying that this was for the world and for nature. Then Brawl Bearhide, who was beside William, saw Cenarius and immediately became a little fanboy, kneeling down and licking his boots. Chapter 1808. William could be very unreasonable and only a few people around him could persuade him. Brawl was obviously one of them. Helpless and bitter, William agreed to board the pirate ship just like that. Even Duque couldn't help but mourn for him for a minute. Just like that, a wolf god, a wolf cub in theory, began their adventure, teasing. Mount Hyjal was the base of the elves, and the Night Elves didn't want to send all their main forces to attack Ragnaros. Thus, they took advantage of the time difference and allowed the fire elements to invade and destroy their home. Malfurion, Isra, and the Green Dragon Legion stayed behind to guard the place. After passing through the huge teleportation portal that Duque had created with Atish, the group of powerhouses finally stepped into the Land of Flames. To be precise, the Land of Flames wasn't exactly the same as the Fire Elemental Plane. The Land of Flames specifically referred to the core area of the Fire Elemental Plane. This wasn't a small space but a vast territory like the Molten Core back then. As soon as they stepped out of the teleportation portal, even the veteran members who had experienced the battle at the Molten Core still smelled a pungent smell of sulfur. Duke activated a huge ice barrier to purify and cool down the air around him at the first moment. Unfortunately, it was still hot and smelly. Beneath his feet, every time he stepped on the leg armor, it was either volcanic ash or molten lava that had just cooled down. He was worried that he would fall into the lava and die immediately. Since their abilities were different, Duque naturally didn't need to constantly let the frost elements revolve around them to form small tornadoes to drive away the heat like he did back then. Looking out from the shield, it seemed as if there was a thin layer of white film that didn't affect one's vision too much. Looking out, there was a crimson sky above the mountain range that represented the horizon. There weren't any real clouds in the sky, and what was rolling in the air were all violent fireballs. Countless fiery meteors fell from the sky of the Land of Fire. Meteors broke through the fiery clouds and fell to the ground. It was a scene of doomsday. If one's elemental sensing ability was strong enough, he or she would be able to clearly discover that behind the cloud-like fireball, an active volcano in the south was spitting out pieces of fire elemental mixture from time to time. It was this mixture of earth and fire elements that was sprayed into the air. Then, under the almost spontaneous guidance of the Land of Fire, it flew to various empty spaces with rich fire elements. looking at the burning meteors dragging long trails across the sky from all directions, blooming with dazzling light. The resurrected Xianxia had a grave expression. As expected, Duke Marcus's judgment was correct. Ragnaros pretended that he hadn't finished the integration, but in fact he had already begun to extract the fire elements of Azeroth. He was producing new fire elementals. These new elemental lifeforms would combine the advantages of the fire elemental plane and the Azeroth plane. They would possess even greater vitality and combat strength. We must hurry. I can roughly sense where the enemies are. They are all demigods. Why don't we split up and attack from different directions? In the past, the god of the wilderness had been led by Malorn. Malorn wasn't around, so naturally his son, Xianxia, was the leader. Unfortunately, ever since Xianxia had personally used his life to prove the universal law of like father like son, dog like son, and been chopped to death by Grandpa Roar's axe, Duque really didn't have the guts to let him face the enemy alone. Although demigods could resurrect infinitely, there was a cooldown. If their souls were destroyed or corrupted by evil cultists, they would be resurrected as evil gods. Duque sighed. There's no rush. I have a spy here. Let's wait for him to report the situation. Spy? How long do we have to wait? Xianxia was puzzled. He had just resurrected and he had died before the Night Elves had joined the alliance. He was actually quite unfamiliar with Duque. Duque was someone who had even planted a spy within the Burning Legion. In the distance, it seemed that something had lit up the fire clouds in the sky, causing the bottom of the clouds to turn from scarlet to a golden red. What is that? Chandrisse pointed into the distance with her sharp eyes. It's a fire eagle. Those who fought Thun back then, each of you will have one, William said casually before summoning the fire hawk in front of Goldring. The wolf god's mouth was wide open and he couldn't close it for a long time. In front of mortals he could be proud of himself. Unfortunately, he was also one of the ones who was behind in terms of information. In fact, after being resurrected in his complete form, the amount of information he had to face was already huge enough. The first thing the elves told him was definitely the terrible situation they were facing at Mount Hyjal. They didn't brag to him, telling him how powerful the alliance was and how they had already stabbed 2 ancient gods to death. William finally felt relieved and directly poured out a pile of epic weapons from his space bag. As a king, the best way to show his military achievements was, of course, to defeat a certain powerful monster or evil god. Although William joined the Alliance of Heroes a little late, he had been with them since the Molten Core period. This is the first time I killed Ragnaros' doppelganger. This is the time I dealt with the Black Dragon Prince Nefarian. Varian showed off his spoils of war to Goldring as if he was counting his treasures. The wolf god was dumbfounded. On the other side, the continuous screams of the fire eagles could be heard, but no one bothered to listen to them. Although there seemed to be a lot of fire eagles, it was a pity that they were weak just by looking at their small size. They formed a dense formation like a swarm of locusts and rushed over while screaming, bringing with them a blazing turbulence. They met a tragic end. Duque only put a fire shield on the outer layer of the ice shield, and these fire eagles crashed into the shining fire shield and turned into a stream of fire. The essence of the fire eagles was still the fire element, so they crashed into the shield and died worthlessly. Then they decomposed into the most primitive fire element and were absorbed by Duque. A demigod who controlled the elements was just that unreasonable. This time, other than the Bear Brothers, the demigods of the wilderness finally changed their opinion of Duque. Suddenly, a wave of fire approached them from afar. Be careful. It's a fire demon. Goldring was very nervous and he immediately bared his teeth. I can feel a strong aura. It's definitely an enemy demigod. Raven god Iwena's current appearance was a little like a harpy. To be precise, she had a human body and the white limbs of a bird. She had a very sexy human body, but her wrists turned into wings and her ankles into a pair of claws. She flapped her wings and wanted to fly into the sky to scout for everyone. Suddenly, she realized that the atmosphere was a little strange. Those mortals didn't seem to have any intention of making a move. It's okay. It's that guy Executus. He's Duque's subordinate. William couldn't help but indirectly help Duque. Chapter 1809. It was an endless army of fire demons. They had huge bodies and just by standing there they could form a wall of fire. Beside them were some subsidiary fire creatures such as the molten fire hounds. They formed a large group. When they walked over, the entire land seemed to flow like a long red river. Occasionally there were a few intertwining turbulences by the river, which leaked out an even hotter aura. The Alliance hero group and the Guardians of Mount Hyjal looked at this spectacular scene with strange feelings. They stared and held their breath, afraid to miss a detail, because it was really exaggerated. When they came here, they were already mentally prepared to fight their way out. Who would have thought that they didn't look like invaders but like liberators? The fire demon army stopped 300 meters away. The former manager, Majordomo Executus, led a huge fire demon over, swaying his snake tail. That fire demon didn't even bring his two obviously powerful molten dogs. Humans all looked the same to fire demons. Fortunately, this guy's appearance was quite unique. He was probably blind in his left eye, and only had a black blindfold that was slanted over it. He had 4 thick bug-like beards on his chin that were a bit like a dreamy eye male's. His left shoulder was empty, but his right shoulder was branded with 1 big and 2 small, a total of 3 pauldrons that looked a bit like Omega. The huge silver metal belt had the same runes. 2 huge pieces of skirt armor protected the flank of his snake tail. Behind the belt, there was a somewhat funny metal frame with a huge flag on it. The flag was painted with the language of the fire demons. Majordomo came up first, crossed his arms and bowed to Duque. "Great Master, this is my former subordinate Xianxia. Now that he has heard that Master has come here, he has decided to lead his troops to abandon the darkness and join the light under Master's great glory." The wilderness gods were a bit dumbfounded. Of course they could feel how powerful Xianxia was. Although there were quite weak demigods, it was obvious that Xianxia was ranked in the middle. Such a powerful fire demon should be the backbone of Ragnaros's subordinates. They surrendered just like that. All of a sudden, Duque's level of pretentiousness was maxed out. The wilderness gods now looked at Duque in a different light. Duque said calmly, "Since you're Majordomo's lackey, you can continue to follow him in the future. After I take control of the land of fire, I will reward you handsomely." "Thank you, Master." The one-eyed fire demon half-deity bowed on the spot. Even after Majordomo's explanation, the gods of the wilderness still felt like they were in a dream. Among the elemental guardians of the land of fire, fire demons were the most terrifying. Xianxia was no exception. As Ragnaros's chief hunter and molten hound trainer, Xianxia patrolled the elemental territory with 2 of his most ferocious beasts, Splitter and Madface. Once upon a time that was indeed the case. The problem was that Majordomo Executus had been dug out by Duque. Back then, Majordomo had played the role of a prime minister. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was second only to one monster but above all others. It was precisely because of Majordomo's betrayal that Ragnaros was the most furious and violent. As the manager, he ran away and brought his lackeys with him. However, the fire demons that remained in the land of fire were in a miserable state. Fire demons were the most intelligent among the fire elemental creatures. If it weren't for the fact that Lager had to control his territory through the fire demons, perhaps he would have executed all the fire demons. Since the day the molten core had fallen, the fire demons had been reduced to a miserable child. He had a share in the work, but there were no benefits at all. Because the fire demons were highly intelligent creatures, how could they not feel resentful? Among the fire demons, Pharaoh was the boss and all the other physics demons were inferior to dogs. With his former boss, Majordomo, acting as the go-between, Sean Knox, who was already full of resentment, immediately rebelled. What was more interesting was that Xianxia was in charge of patrolling the land of fire. In addition, in this life, Duque directly sold off the green dragon Olizarazer to clean up the mess for Isra. Naturally, there wouldn't be a Fire Hawk King with the same name here. After all, when Ragnaros's army poured into Mount Hyjal, the green dragon Olizarazer betrayed the alliance and helped release the traitorous archdruid Fandral Stackhelm. As a reward, she was purified by the flames and reborn into a terrifying fire hawk. In this life, the fire hawk was gone and naturally there would be no fire druid Stackhelm. In this life, there were originally 7 bosses in the land of fire, but now there were only 4 left. This method of directly weakening the competitors was really King awesome. Majordomo spoke again. "Master, I have already asked around. Ragnaros is in a volcano, concentrating on building his King of Fire army. If we can quickly eliminate the remaining 3 leaders, we can launch a surprise attack and catch Ragnaros off guard." As the saying went, the second Japanese were more ruthless than the real Japanese. Just like during the War of Resistance against Japan, the Japanese were cruel, but the traitors who defected to the Japanese knew that if the Japanese did not win, they would definitely end up worse than the Japanese. As long as Ragnaros was not finished, Majordomo could not even dream of a good night's sleep. So when it came to betraying his former master, he was more ruthless than anyone else. To be honest, the gods of the wilderness looked down on his humble attitude, but they would not refuse the help of this kind of traitor. With a guide, he would be able to deal with Ragnaros more quickly. At least in terms of interests, there was no conflict. After passing his thoughts to Duque through the soul connection, Duque was able to open a three-dimensional topographic map of the Land of Fire in this life. Majordomo explained. Now there are only 3 leaders left. They are the Black Web Spider Mother Bestarak, the Lava Elemental Lord Leolis, and the former Void Lord and current Gatekeeper Ballock. As the Black Web Spider Mother, Bestarak and her ruthless descendants feed on the lava and flames on the remains of the fire elemental to satisfy their appetite. In order to provide more nourishment for her offspring, Bestarak weaved a huge net of fire around her nest to trap prey that strayed into it. Leolis is one of the oldest existing elemental creatures. He originated from the primordial flames that created Azeroth. He was responsible for creating new elements in the Land of Fire, and at the same time he thought that the titans who moved him were too arrogant. This hatred still burns in his heart. Chapter 1810. In the elemental war of Azeroth in ancient times, Ballock rose to fame as a ruthless warrior. Now that he is trapped in the Land of Fire, he has become increasingly irrational. Few elementals dare to disturb him, for fear that they will be sacrificed to his desire for battle. After Majordomo briefly introduced the experiences, strengths, and abilities of the 3 leaders, the allied forces fell into a brief silence. Duque did not speak, but he was actually letting them pick their own opponents. This was called the allied forces, but in fact, Duque was quite annoyed. Because the god of the wilderness and the others had never cooperated with the alliance at all, and neither side was willing to submit to the other. Perhaps they were indeed very strong, but relatively speaking they also had bad tempers. Because they were all existences that had stepped into the realm of gods, even if they did not feel that they were superior to others and that all mortals had to worship them, their tone had a sense of transcendence. They would always say things like, "Without us fighting back then, Azeroth would have already been destroyed," and whatnot. It was fine to say it once or twice, but it was annoying to say it all the time. What was even more intolerable to Duque was the doctrine of the Logia. Cenarius actually asked Duque if he could completely remove the fire elements from the original vicinity of Mount Hyjal after controlling the Land of Fire, or change the location of the Land of Fire, so that Mount Hyjal could be restored to its original lush forest. When Duque said that he did not have the ability to separate such a large plain, Cenarius suggested that he could shut down the mines and factories of the Alliance, which would pollute the environment. As they talked, he said that logging was not a good idea. He heard that a lot of trees had been cut in the Elven forest. According to the Druid doctrine that he passed on to the Night Elves, at the very least, they should plant as many trees as they cut down. At that time, Duque rolled his eyes and said, "Why don't we designate the 365 day of every year as Arbor Day?" Cenarius said on the spot that this could be done. He asked Duque to implement it. Duque was so bold that he wanted someone to kill a god for the second time. There was indeed a huge ideological gap between environmentalism and the pioneers of the Industrial Revolution. It was because Duque didn't want to use Return of the Legion to continue letting the bitter mortals fight against the demons of the Burning Legion with their swords that he decided to use all sorts of black technology talents. "You, Cenarius, want me to destroy all industrial civilization and go back to pre-liberation, no, even more primitive than the Middle Ages? Do you think you can deal with the entire Burning Legion with just your god of the wilderness? Don't even think about it." If not for the hateful members of the World Annihilation Party in front of him, Duque might have really gotten into a fight with the demigods of the wilderness. Isra's idea was good, but it had side effects. As if he wanted to show off the strength of a wilderness demigod, Cenarius said, "We have the upper hand in terms of combat power. The 6 wilderness demigods will split up and quickly deal with the other party's leader. Then we'll ambush Ragnaros." Unexpectedly, the Bear brothers were the first to speak. Ashik said in a low voice, "We hate spiders." Ashik said, but it feels good to take down these guys by force. Ashik said, I suggest that Duque come with us to deal with the dragon web brood mother. Duque shrugged. I don't care. I feel that the lava elemental giant Leolise is more suitable for Kitotora and Cenarius. Leave it to me and Avienna. I can show off my strength in front of my son. The wolf god seemed to have eaten too much garlic and was quite boastful. Who's your son? William retorted. It's you. The wolf god started his verbal cannon mode. Oh no. I'm not, Qinghua answered fluently. Anyway, the bystanders felt great watching the wolf and man bicker. Duque almost wanted to say you guys should hurry up and acknowledge each other. Duque didn't dare to say it out loud. Who knew if the two old friends, Lang Rin and Anduin Lothar, would jump out of their graves and shout, Filthy Demon King, grant me power. Then they would believe in Brother Spring and resurrect on the spot, beating up Duque for this. Cenarius, who was beside him, thought for a while and agreed. A demigod lava giant that could spit fire was indeed a counter to Cenarius. He also couldn't use the defense of Totora's turtle shell. However, Cenarius felt that it was a little inappropriate to deal with a demon-born fire elemental guardian. His green face was a little red. Actually, my skills are mainly support. Totora is a pure defender. Can you give our team a demigod with strong attack power? After all, Ashik's team already has 3 demigods. Oh, lack of attack power? Say so earlier. I have a mortal under me who reincarnated into a hero spirit. His attack power is definitely top-notch. He once killed a demigod. As Duque spoke, the smile on his face became more and more strange. Cenarius didn't know that it was a trap and immediately agreed. Okay, then let him come to my team. But let me say this first, I don't want mortals who are too weak. No problem. I guarantee that he's strong. Duque patted his chest. Then, come. Grom, get closer to Lord Cenarius. When Lord Howl strode out of the void with his axe, Cenarius's expression was very interesting. The Alliance experts suppressed their laughter and didn't dare to laugh. They were afraid that if they did they would laugh like pigs. Duque didn't say a word wrong. His attack power was so high that even the gods were amazed. He killed an abyssal lord with one axe and didn't even gasp for breath. He was indeed a mortal reincarnated expert. Lord Howl was dead, but he turned into a hero spirit after his death. It was even more true that he had killed a demigod. If the one he killed was not Cenarius himself, everything would be perfect. Cenarius's face turned green. Well, that's what his face looked like. The demigod's mouth twitched for a long time before he finally burst out in anger. Duke Marcus, are you deliberately humiliating me? Or are you not sincere in cooperating with the god of the wilderness? Faced with Cenarius's anger, Duque was not the least bit afraid. Or rather, it was Duque who had detonated this contradiction bomb. If history had been as it had been, Isra would have no problem resurrecting so many wilderness demigods at once. In the original situation, when Enzos had invested so many demigod enemies in one go, he would have done his best to increase the strength of the righteous faction. In this life, Duque had appeared out of nowhere and had helped the alliance and the righteous faction to accumulate a number of demigods. Isra's actions seemed to have increased his strength on the surface, but in reality he had buried a huge contradiction. That was the battle between the nature faction and the industrial faction. Just looking at the number of demigod experts, the nature faction would definitely have the most. The problem was that Duque and the mortals had other ideas, which directly led to disharmony. The biggest contradiction was who had the final say among the demigods. Chapter 1811. Who is the boss? In any temporary or permanent organization, this was a very profound field of study. To make an organization inefficient and difficult to make decisions, it was very simple. The more people with decision-making power, the better. For example, a 1,000-member council with one person having one vote was definitely hundreds of times less efficient than a 3-person decision-making group. On the contrary, a centralized organization controlled by only a few people was definitely the most efficient. However, efficiency did not equal correctness. Therefore, in the history of Earth, countries controlled by certain tyrants or wise monarchs were either strong enough to sweep away the surrounding countries, or they declined and soon perished. The only reason why the alliance could be as strong as it was today was that the leader was Duque, a transmigrator. In the eyes of ordinary people, the leader had an extremely bright appearance, but few people could understand their bitterness. Almost every day, a group of people came with the most cutting-edge technology asking you to make a decision. If you had enough money, manpower, and material resources, of course you could try every one of them. Unfortunately, there was never a leader who had so many resources to waste. On Earth, Edison had used more than 6,000 kinds of materials and experimented more than 7,000 times, but he failed again and again. After experiencing thousands of failures that were simply horrors and nightmares in the eyes of mortals, Edison, who was good at summarizing, finally developed the electric light. Yes, this was a good story. But this was based on the basis that Edison was indeed a genius and a diligent and persistent genius. Duque faced thousands of reports every day, among which there were hundreds of reports about inventions. There was no lack of wonderful ideas such as planting pineapples in the ice and snow of Northrend and developing tropical fish farming. If Duque was not a transmigrator, then the development of the alliance would easily be led astray by those imaginative dwarves and gnomes. It was precisely because he knew that the alliance and even the whole world could not find a better leader than him that Duque held on to power. For this he did not hesitate, or rather he controlled the absolute rule of the alliance by taking care of the queens. In contrast, he also proved his ability with a healthy and rapidly developing alliance, repaying the trust of all the leaders of the alliance in him. Unfortunately, the appearance of the gods of the wilderness would undoubtedly impact Duque's authority. More importantly, Duque knew that this group of violent Azeroth Greens would definitely lead Azeroth into the gutter. Moreover, when Cenarius and Master Roar had clashed, other than the widely circulated version, there was also a secret that Master Roar had revealed himself. At that time, Cenarius had said that trees were the Night Elves' friends. The number of trees that Master Roar cut down was the number of his brothers and sisters that Master Roar had cut down. He wanted Master Roar to repay this debt of blood with the lives of orcs. Strictly speaking, this was not wrong. Once a tree reached the level of a 1,000-year-old tree, it would have the chance to become a treant with the help of a druid. From there, it would become an ancient tree of war, an ancient tree of wisdom, or even an ancient tree of life. The Warsong Beastmen had cut down trees, the Horde had cut down trees, and the Alliance had also cut down a lot of trees to develop their economy. On top of that, Duque had taken in Master Ho as his follower. Sooner or later this grudge and this debt would explode. The most troublesome thing was that the Druid doctrine of these naturalists hadn't changed for nearly 10,000 years. Not changing meant that they were stubbornly conservative. Moreover, the original version of history had already proven that the gods of the wilderness weren't the decisive force in defeating the Burning Legion. Since that was the case, Duque couldn't give up his leadership. Now, a mere weakling like Cenarius was already rubbing elbows with him. If it was his father, the so-called strongest demigod, White Deer Malorn, could he still give in? Faced with Cenarius's questioning, Duque didn't back down. Instead, he laughed. Cooperation? The premise of cooperation is sincere cooperation. You have to thoroughly consider both sides' combat strength and specialties to come up with the most suitable plan. You can't fight for credit holding up the so-called cooperation in order to show off your strength. In reality, you're just holding us back. Cenarius was angry. You're saying that our god of the wilderness is holding you back, Duke Marcus? Duque raised 2 fingers. First, you can't represent the will of all the gods of the wilderness. And back then, the leader of the gods of the wilderness was your father, Malorn, not you, Cenarius. Cenarius couldn't catch his breath, and he looked like he was about to die from anger. Secondly, before your god of the wilderness returned, my team and I did a better job than all of you. We have already destroyed Sea, Thun and Yogg-Saron, overturned Ragnaros once, and killed the traitorous Earth Guardian Dragon Nisario once. I'm better at dealing with these opponents than you are. So what in the ancient war? Cenarius subconsciously boasted. Unexpectedly, Duque immediately interrupted him and raised a 3rd finger. Although I'm a little sorry, the fact is that when you were fighting on the battlefield, it was me from 10,000 years ago who sneaked into the Burning Legion and blew up Sargeras's portal, as well as his largest stronghold in the Twisting Nether. Oh, I also killed Archimonde once. So in terms of merit, all of you gods of the wilderness combined can't compare to me. Duque's words were reasonable and he had to be convinced. Cenarius choked, and what made him even more upset was that the other gods of the wilderness actually nodded in agreement with Duque's words. Duque was right. The god of the wilderness was just a name and they had never been a true whole. Those who advocated nature were actually only his line. Duque concluded, our enemy is very powerful. In addition to Enzoth this time, I can foresee that Yashaji will also come out and cause a big incident. In the future, the Burning Legion will definitely return again. History has proven that the god of the wilderness alone cannot achieve complete victory. Wasn't the victory of the past the result of the dragons, the god of the wilderness, and countless mortals working together? We need to unite all the forces that can be united. For this, I didn't even hesitate to form an alliance with a tribe that was once hostile, because this is the only way to fight against an increasingly large and powerful enemy. If you hold on to the narrow path of nature and hatred now, how will you coordinate the righteous forces of the entire Azeroth in the future? At this point, Duque had already secretly changed the concept and laid the groundwork for Cenarius. What else could Cenarius say? He suddenly didn't have that position. As long as Cenarius was dealt with and the political alliance of the god of the wilderness was dissolved, when Duque controlled the power, even if Malorn revived in the future, he wouldn't be able to shake Duque's leadership. Chapter 1812. At this time, the Bear brothers were the first to support Duque. Since Duke Marcus is doing a good job fighting evil, why should we disrupt his rhythm and destroy his way of doing things? We can actually cooperate with them. Raven goddess Iwena's voice was strangely hoarse and low, sounding rather magnetic. Elun said that the Burning Legion's demons are endless. If we can't maintain our strength in a victory, then even if we win this time, we will definitely lose the next war. In fact, we almost lost the War of the Ancients. Iwena spoke very tactfully, not directly agreeing or disagreeing. But she pointed out the defeat on the battlefield of the War of the Ancients. Cenarius was a little speechless. Iwena was right. If it weren't for his father protecting him, he wouldn't have had to rush into the main battlefield to fight the Arc-Herons, resulting in his death with his neck broken. In fact, most of the 6 demigods had died or been seriously injured at least once. At the beginning of this resurrection, Isra had personally told them that the turmoil in Azeroth was just the beginning, and that the Legion would come again. At this time, Goldring bared his teeth. Just because Duque accepted a demigod with my blood, I support him. This time Duque was a little surprised. He didn't expect that following the plot, and accepting the old alpha wolf gene, could he also gain Goldring's favor? That was a little too awesome. Tortola the tortoise said, I don't want to see. That was a forfeit. Speaking of which, the tortoise god in Duque's memory didn't seem to speak like this, right? Duque rubbed his eyebrows. He couldn't be bothered to think too much. Ever since he appeared in this life, he had simply destroyed the original work and made many historical events unrecognizable. Even the mother of history couldn't recognize him. It had been a good plan to resurrect the 4 demigods and then organize a counterattack, but now it was Duque leading a team to trample on the field. Duque noticed that after Isra resurrected these demigods, he didn't force them to obey Duke Marcus's command. Duque was a little puzzled. Does he think I can handle them? On this side, Cenarius finally realized that the situation was irreversible. He suddenly sighed. Duke Marcus, do you think that I'm greedy for power or deliberately obstructing you? Duque was slightly stunned. Cenarius had never been this kind of person in any of his lifetimes. In the Ancient War, it was he who had spoken up and convinced his father, Malorn, and the other gods of the wilderness to form an interspecies group of demigods. But in the war, the commanding authority was given to Jared Shadowsong of the Night Elves. It would be an exaggeration to say that Cenarius was greedy for power. But what was with this slightly hostile feeling? Cenarius strode in front of Duque and spread out his hands. Did you know? Duke Marcus, I'm actually feeling uneasy. Uneasy. Think about it. In the Ancient War, so many experts and countless mortals sacrificed their blood and lives to resist the Burning Legion. But in the end, you were the only one who achieved supreme fame. Duke Marcus. We who fought bravely on the front lines became a cover for your actions. Duque raised his eyebrows. He was a little unhappy, but he didn't say anything. That's right. In terms of results, your actions of infiltrating the enemy's rear and overturning the Burning Legion were very noble. Mother agreed to your actions, but that doesn't mean that I can accept that Father and I became the main force of the feint. Father even sacrificed himself to save me. So, ever since that time I've never liked you, the great hero of the Ancient War. Cenarius took a step forward, his huge body approaching Duque. Duque wasn't afraid at all. With a thought, a pillar of fire rose under his feet and lifted him up, allowing him to rise until he was at the same level as the 5-meter-tall Cenarius. Dooku slowly opened his mouth, his voice carrying a threatening aura without being angry. Then what do you want? This is a team of experts formed with the common goal of defeating the evil existence that intends to destroy the world. Compared to other experts, I trust my command and arrangements more. Be it my old partner or Isra, they all acknowledge my ability to command. That's right. I insist on taking control of this team. Of course, I won't force any existence to throw away their lives or do something they don't want to do. Duque waved to Tish and a portal opened beside him. On the other side of the portal was naturally the lush Mount Hyjal. Duque said coldly, "The door is over there. Those who don't agree with my command can leave. I won't send you off." After Duque finished speaking, Cenarius's somewhat tyrannical aura suddenly disappeared. His shoulders drooped and he sighed. No, what I want to say is that I will respect everyone's opinion, and I have no intention of leaving this team. But at the same time, I also have reservations about your philosophy and the way you do things. If there's a need for sacrifice or a feint, I hope you can tell us immediately instead of acting in secret. Duque understood what Cenarius meant. He also sighed. A long time ago, I always had the attitude of seeking common ground while reserving differences when forming an alliance and team. With the goal of fighting against evil, I can allow my allies to have all kinds of habits, ideals, lifestyles, beliefs, and even powers from the evil side. Duque pointed at Lord Howell, who had not said a word. Even he was an enemy that we had to fight to the death. Duque changed the topic. Whether you believe it or not, let me tell you this. Grom and I were requested by the Dimensional Dragon King Nozdormu to return to the Ancient War. We accidentally went to the Burning Legion's camp. In order to protect ourselves, we pretended to join Sargeras and hid in the enemy's camp. At that time we weren't even chess pieces. Duque glanced at Tyrande, who was beginning to blush. If not for that accident, we wouldn't even have had the chance to effect that great war. It was only when we met Tyrande that we contacted Alun, and then there was anything else. It was only at the very last moment that we managed to turn from chess pieces to the main force. So there was no need to sacrifice you as cannon fodder to attract the attention of the main force. Tyrande hurriedly said, pressing a hand to her chest. I swear in the name of the moon goddess Alun that this is true. If I hadn't been captured, the moon goddess wouldn't even know that a group of righteous people had infiltrated the army and even made their way to the top. With these words, the few wilderness demigods finally felt the knot in their hearts disappear. Chapter 1813. Cenarius had tried to test Duque's ideas, but at the end of the day, it was all because Duque had caused too much trouble back then. He had blown up Chief Saw's nest and he was in the limelight. The mortals from back then were dead, but what about the rest? More than half of the wilderness demigods had died, some famous, some not. In the end, they had all been taken advantage of by Duque. Could they feel better? Especially Cenarius, who had lost his father. Back then his father's neck had been broken by Archimonde to save Cenarius, and he had died a heroic death. Even if it had been 10,000 years, it was understandable for him to be angry. Thinking of this, Duque's thoughts were clear. Some things were better to be exposed in advance. If that knot in the heart continued to develop, it might become a soul-devouring monster. At the end of the day, Senna was afraid of being betrayed by Duque a second time. Phew. Duque let out a long breath. Let's all look forward. Since you've all been resurrected and now you're allies fighting for the same goal, just pretend that you've forgotten what happened in your previous life. This, pretend that you've forgotten, was really clever, and the facial muscles of several alliance bigwigs twitched secretly. Duque was clearly telling Cenarius, it doesn't matter if others believe it or not, you have to believe it first. Duque pulled the burly Lord Howell over and said to Cenarius, since you're in this group, you're giving your back to the other party. Grom, are you willing to give your back to Cenarius? Lord Howell was an honest man and he didn't hesitate. I cut you back then because I was a tribal warrior. Now I believe you because we have a common enemy. I won't apologize. If you're unhappy with me, we can fight again after the war. Let's fight if we're real men. That was what Lord Howell meant. Cenarius's eyes almost rolled back in his head. In fact, there were many kinds of gods. The ones most known to mortals were, of course, those with the ultimate killer moves. For example, the white deer god Malorn had the famous body of the white deer. His body shone with a pure and holy white light that could directly turn low-level demons into ashes and blind high-level demons. In a sense, it was the combination of a long-lasting flash grenade and Ashbringer. Unless it was a high-grade void overlord or one of the army's 3 heavyweights, any demon could be trampled to death by Malorn's hoof. Another example would be Elune, the demigod's mother. Although she rarely made a move, one could tell how powerful she was from her priests, Starfall. There was nothing Starfall couldn't deal with. If there was, then he would use 2. If there were more, then there would be no end to it. In any case, the world would be bombed until the nuclear core was flattened. But Duque had heard of a legend that when gods gave birth to a child, they would split their divinity and fuse it together to bestow a child. After splitting the divinity, he wouldn't have that power. So, whether it was because Malorn and Elune were stingy or something else, mortals thought that Cenarius could fight, carry and heal. In fact, Duque, who was familiar with history, knew that Cenarius was a relatively rare support-type demigod. Thorn Halo, Entangling Roots, Tranquility. He didn't even have a single attack skill that he was best at. They were all support-type or healing-type. If he really had to fight Lord Howl, who had returned to his peak, it would be a pity that he couldn't just use half an axe. In the past he had used 1 axe to cut him and now it was still 1 axe. This kind of tragedy of being killed with 1 axe. Talking about it would make one cry. Cenarius's mouth moved for a long time, but he still couldn't let out a fart. Duque knew that he was in despair. Anyway, looking at Cenarius's constipated expression, Duque felt really good. Cenarius admitted defeat and Duque took the lead. There was no need to chase after him. After all, they were in the same trench. Duque said calmly, "I have personally witnessed the power of the Burning Legion, which is why I have sacrificed the environment to improve the industrial level. However, I will seriously consider the idea of sustainable development." What was sustainable development? Cenarius was dumbfounded, but it sounded pretty good. The doctrine of nature hated mortals who abused natural resources and destroyed trees that could be left for future generations. Now, with Duque's sustainable development, he was immediately hooked. He looked around and found that they were in enemy territory. They had actually wasted a lot of time just now. If not for the fact that the patrol leaders were on their side, something might have happened just now. Alright, when we go back, I will find you to listen to the idea of sustainable development. Now let's deal with the enemies first. I will listen to your instructions, Cenarius said. Duque narrowed his eyes. Actually, these enemies are far from that troublesome and can be dealt with quickly. Leave the dragon web mother to me. I will go show my new subordinates my strength. The Alliance heroes come with me. As Duque spoke, he glanced at the fire demon hunter Xianxia, who hurriedly lowered his head and then said, "The Bear Brothers and Avina will deal with Lord Leolise. The rest of the demigods will deal with Gatekeeper Belloc." Understood. The main force split into 3 groups and set off. As a true fire elemental plane, the first reaction of mortals when they walked here was heat. It was heat that transcended time and space. There was a limit to the cold. At the very least, under normal circumstances, there was no such thing as cold that exceeded absolute zero. But there was no limit to the activity of molecules, so the temperature could be thousands of degrees or even tens of thousands of degrees. Even though Duque used the ice shield to cool the air, and the temperature had even seeped into the ground to offset the high heat from below, the mortal heroes could still feel the terrifying heat from the core of the land as they walked on the surface of the land of fire. They felt like a live fish that was being fried over a fierce fire. Even though they knew that they would still die if they flipped over, they could not help but jump around. Sigh. Duque sighed softly. An ice bridge appeared out of thin air for the mortal heroes to walk on. Whoosh. I'm alive. Imriel, who had not participated in the battle at the Molten Core, was still as lively as ever. I thought my skin was going to be burned by my own armor. Duque slapped the back of his head with his hoof. Idiot, you're cool. It's my own frost circuit that consumes the magic power. Then why did you bring us here? The hoof was a little puzzled. Can't you just rely on those demigods? Duque spoke the truth. There will be a battle between me and Ragnaros, but I don't have much time to deal with those fire elemental creatures that jump out. Demigods from the wilderness will have their battle prowess greatly reduced in this place. The only good thing was that Duque and the others did not need to clear the monsters on the road. Chapter 1814. In World of Warcraft, there was a story that not many players knew about. If the players got the Ashbringer from the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse in Naxxramas, when they returned to the Scarlet Crusade with the Ashbringer, All the Scarlet Crusade NPCs would turn from hostile to friendly when they saw the players. Then they would kneel to the players one by one. That was an unforgettable scene. Duque had never imagined that he would have this privilege one day. For example, he had subdued the Courage bug people of On Courage. But in front of the big shots of the Alliance, he didn't do this kind of thing that would make him look good. What appeared in front of everyone now was a one-sided scene. The whole Land of Fire was full of traces of fierce battles. It looked like the Alliance had sent 1,000,000 soldiers to plow the entire Land of Fire. The high-energy fiery red wrist guards that occasionally scattered on the ground were the minions of a certain lava monster when it was alive. This monster that could split into countless little burning men was quite difficult to deal with. One mistake could wipe out the whole team. It was like a pile of scattered rocks. If the players couldn't sense the fire elements emitting from the rocks that were purer than the fire elements on the scorched land, they wouldn't have imagined that it was a terrifying 5-story tall lava giant, Molten Fire Lord. It was a pity that all their glories and their possibly glorious history had vanished with the betrayal of the Fire Goblin clan. The fire demons were the most intelligent among the fire elemental creatures, and their betrayal was fatal to Ragnaros. Perhaps the fire demons weren't the most powerful individually, but they were highly intelligent and knew how to cooperate. As the patroller and sentinel of the Land of Fire, their betrayal made Ragnaros blind and deaf. The Land of Fire was the gathering place of fire elemental creatures. These fierce-tempered creatures fought all day long, and it would be abnormal if tens of thousands of fire elemental creatures died every day. Ragnaros didn't care because the special geographical environment of the Land of Fire would give birth to more fire elemental creatures. Like raising poisonous insects, the fire elemental creatures would select the more excellent and powerful fire elemental creatures through constant battles. Ragnaros only wanted to enslave the most powerful of them. In this situation, the fire demon army planned to eliminate all the obstacles on the way to the 3 leaders. In order to please Duque, the former manager Majordomo even ordered the fire demons who were free to help clean up the battlefield. Asking the fire demon who had no combat mission to run to the 2 sides of the road was both to point the way for Duque and to flatter him. X greets the Supreme Lord of Flames, Duke Marcus. Almost all of them used the same tone. The fire demons did not speak the common tongue but a very ancient elemental language that could only be understood by the mortals in the Dark Imperium. Most of the Alliance experts didn't understand, but at least one of them did. He was the former elven prince Kale, that Sunstrider who had followed Duque here. As one of the witnesses to Duque's rise, Kale, was envious, but more than that he was grateful. If it weren't for Duque's protection, he might have already been running on the dark path of depravity and never to return. This was real. In order to weaken the Sunstrider family's influence among the High Elves, Queen Sylvanas could directly accuse him of treason, which was not considered a slander, and give him a hat that could never be washed away. He could only associate with people like Illidan. Duque once told him in a casual conversation, "I heard Nozdormu say that in parallel worlds of different spacetimes, there will be different versions of you. If you were in another timeline, you might be the villain." Although it was a joke, Kale, was very attentive. Now that he was the chairman of the Kirin Tor Parliament of the Dalajan, he had long felt his limits. If he was still the prince of the previous dynasty who had nothing to ask for, of course he could just muddle along. However, Sylvanas became a demigod, and then Magni turned himself into a diamond man in order to break through to the demigod realm. This stimulated Kale, nerves. He vaguely felt that his path to ascension was here and now. Duque, who had planned earlier, had already controlled everything here in advance. As long as Duque defeated Ragnaros, he would become the true master of the Land of Fire. Duque was a hurdle that Kale, could not avoid. Facing Duque, the kind-hearted Kale, could not have any evil thoughts, so he secretly made a decision. On the other side, surrounded by hundreds of fire demons, Duque and his group were like an emperor on an inspection tour. They majestically arrived at the place where the mother of Ghostweb Spider was. The sky was dark and hot black ashes were swirling everywhere. The closer they got to Bestelac's place, the easier it was to see the white spider webs entangled in the rubble and on the roadside. Ordinary spider webs could not exist in such a high-temperature environment. They would have long turned into an unknown burnt substance. Only the flashing flames and the cobwebs made of ultra-pure fire elements could exist in this special world. Spiders were the most sensitive creatures. Every vibration of their webs would be sensed by their sensitive tactile nerves. They could easily distinguish which vibrations came from the natural wind, which were prey and which were enemies. Faced with a large number of fire demons, the mother of Ghostweb was a little confused. A mysterious female voice echoed in the spiritual sea of all the visitors to Duque. It was a sinister voice. "Shane Knox, are you out of your mind or something? This is not a place for you and your long-tailed subordinates. Don't say I didn't warn you. If you go any further, don't blame me for feeding your subordinates to my children." The first half of the conversation was normal, but after the mother of Ghostweb Spider's strange perception system sensed someone. Major Domo. Damn it. You betrayed the great master Ragnaros. The mother of Ghostweb Spider screamed, followed by her exclamation. Thousands of small spiders suddenly emerged from the seemingly empty cracks in the surrounding rocks. There were so many of them that in less than 3 breaths, they filled the entire field of vision of the Alliance heroes. The dark ground with a dazzling red light was suddenly filled with these 8-legged creatures. The long furry legs and the mouthparts that made suah noises made the heroines of the hero group shudder. Be careful of the yellow-green legs. They will self-destruct. Chapter 18:15. Shaynox began to play the role of Duque's underling and reminded them beforehand. 4 fire elemental creatures like fire demons, damage caused by fire elements and explosions was ineffective against them. For mortals, however, it was a different story. They were like walking bombs. But it didn't matter. Duque didn't bring so many of his underlings here just for decoration. The 2 night elf archers were the first to attack. Tyrant and Chandries were the best archers on the planet when they knocked their arrows. When the Windrunner sisters were here, Tyrant was more of a priestess in order to maintain the balance of the team. When the team needed long-range attacks, these masters of 2 professions would immediately switch to the profession that the team needed the most and pour fire into the distance. The arrows tore through the burning air and accurately nailed the yellow-green spiders. The nightmare web nest beetles, which had been programmed to self-destruct as soon as they touched an enemy, faithfully carried out their mission of self-destructing soldiers. Bang bang bang. They exploded, but unfortunately they only blew up their own kind, the other nightmare web spiders. It wasn't just the archers who attacked. Kale, that's also launched an attack. The arcane flames circling above his head began to rain out sparks. At first the sparks were only the size of a pinky, but after absorbing the fire elements in the air, they quickly turned into small fireballs the size of bowls. These small fireballs were not to be underestimated. Every single one of them that hit a group of spiders was enough to blow them up into the sky. Broken limbs and broken legs flew all over the place. High-level mysteries crushed low-level mysteries. High-level fire elements easily devoured low-level fire elements. As a powerful mage who had merged with his phoenix and barely reached the level of a demigod, Kai Zi's strength was unquestionable. After the few long-range attackers showed their power, the remaining melee or long-range attackers became a little bored. Edwin Van Cleef still held 4 daggers in his left hand, ready to throw them at any moment, but he was clearly a little relaxed. The funniest thing was Hoof, who waved the huge divine axe, Flamejoy, and eagerly showed everyone the power of the divine weapon. Since it was already Flamejoy, and not Shadow Sorrow, it was only a matter of time. The divine artifact's ability to absorb fire elements had also changed. It was rare that the fire element here was so rich. His hoofs could easily accumulate enough energy without slashing anyone. Then he would pour all the fire energy in the divine artifact out. Walala. With a wave of his hand, a wave of fire appeared. The ultra-high-purity flame wave was like a bulldozer, flattening everything in front of the flame wave. Whether it was a spider or a spider web, there was only one result: ashes. Tyrion Fordring stared at the scene with wide eyes. This kind of lethality was already comparable to the Ashbringer. It was just that every attack of Ashbringer consumed a large amount of holy light. Even with the enhancement of the artifact itself, the burden on the user's spiritual power was still not small. Alas, the hoof didn't even need to expend its energy to absorb the energy around it. The fire elements surged into the divine weapon on their own. This was a powerful move that consumed almost no energy at all. What the F***CK is infinite light cannon. This was simply a map cannon. If the spiders could speak and complain, they would definitely say, "Oh my god." There's a German girl who's cheating. Of course, Imriel's performance did not last long before it was over. The mother of Dragon Web Spider said, "Learn more about elemental domination." And the hoof was finished. Divine artifacts were inanimate objects after all. They may have their own simple will, but they were ultimately the effects of tactics set by their creators in advance. When a real demigod began to dominate the surrounding elements, and you could not compete with the other party for elemental domination, it was inevitable that you would die. Hoof, you could ask her to generate electricity like a generator and produce holy light as an energy source. This was not a problem. However, it was difficult for her to control the fire elements that she could not control. All of a sudden, Flame Joy was silent. Hoof was like a child whose favorite toy had been taken away. She looked so sad that she almost cried on the spot. Duque rolled his eyes at her. Only then did she stick out her little tongue and restrain her emotions. The group slowly advanced to the nest of the mother of Dragon Web Spider. It was a very strange place. Strictly speaking, it was a semi-open structure. A few huge and steep rocks pierced straight into the chaotic, scorching sky. On these rocks, which were probably no taller than 10 stories, was a huge red and yellow spider web. Looking up from the bottom, one could clearly see a huge spider-like creature hanging upside down from above. Although she also had 8 legs, strictly speaking, under her glowing yellow abdomen, only 6 of them were functioning. The 2 front legs were more like hooks, because these 2 forelegs were inlaid with grayish-black metal armor. It was conceivable that the mother of Dragon Web Spider would use these 2 hook-like forearms as scythes to harvest the lives of its enemies. The mother of Dragon Web Spider should have compound eyes like flies. Unfortunately, her eyes were full of flames that kept spurting out, making it impossible to see her face clearly. However, Duque was not interested in her body shape. Beside him, Executus swayed his red snake tail and stepped forward to shout, "In front of you is the new master of the Land of Fire who once defeated Ragnaros, the great demigod of the weave, Duke Marcus. He will soon become the supreme ruler of this scorching land. Betelak, if you know what's good for you, hurry up and greet your new master, so that you and your soul can avoid the fate of destruction in the next purge." Before Executus could finish, Betelak had already sneered. "Ha! Greet. I have 8 legs, but I will not bend even one of them for this puny human demigod. I am me. I only care about the growth of my children. You fire demons are all shameless traitors. Don't compare me to you." Majordomo shrugged, and the long black spikes on his shoulders swayed like a forest of spears. "Then there's nothing to say. Very well, I have no idea that you will submit. Then let me make you the first sacrifice for the great master to rule this land." With that, Executus turned around and bowed deeply to Duque, who was many times smaller than him, and then retreated to the side. Bestelac screamed, "Children! Come out! It's time to eat." As her voice fell, more than a dozen giant spiders the size of tanks suddenly broke through the stone walls and surged over from all directions. Dragonnet worker bug? Even Sean and Nox frowned. These giant bugs were definitely not easy to deal with. Chapter 1816. The dark web worker bug itself was not too scary. In terms of attack skills, it only knew how to spit out a bunch of scorching venom to burn the enemy in front of it. It could also spit out flames. If it was a little disgusting, it could just eat a young spider to regain some vitality. What was really difficult to deal with was its characteristics. As long as one worker bug was killed, Betelak would go crazy and enter a frenzied state. In the past, there was a powerful fire elemental lord who killed 5 of her children worker bugs, without a care, and was directly torn to pieces by the crazy Betelak. Shanox really wanted to remind Duque, but the second brother of Executus smiled lewdly and did not care at all. Boss even secretly shook his head at him and told him not to meddle. Although Shanox also knew that there could be a world of difference in strength between demigods. For example, if he were to fight with the current master of the Land of Fire, Logger, he would definitely be killed. But this demigod hunter still felt a little uncertain. In the end, he still remained silent. It was true that he had defected to Duque. Since Duque did not mind showing off his strength, he was also willing to see how powerful his new master was. More than a dozen huge dark web worker bugs quickly rushed over. Behind them and at their feet there were countless small spiders. The patter of footsteps and the sharp grinding of teeth made the Alliance powerhouses feel a little numb. Since Duque said that it was none of their business, no one thought of making a move. They just habitually raised the weapons in their hands. A new flame suddenly shone in the air and everyone saw a strange scene. Time seemed to have sped up, and the fire clouds that seemed to be tumbling randomly in the air were gathering together in a strange trajectory. In less than 2 seconds, the smoke in the sky had turned into long spears of flames. Hissing sounds could be heard as the spears tore through the air. They pierced through the spider webs above their heads with unparalleled ferocity and fell to the ground. The flame spears with a higher temperature easily pierced through the bodies of the dark web worker bugs. On the spot, more than a dozen worker bugs let out miserable cries and fell to the ground. Xianxia's face twitched. Even he did not dare to kill so many of the broodmother's children like this. This was simply courting death. Did his new master have absolute confidence in him? Or was he possessed? Sure enough, the broodmother's voice sounded like it came from the depths of hell, and the flames spewing out of its eye sockets were at least a meter high. Perhaps this was the death stare. Bestilac gnashed her teeth and roared, "Damn humans! Very well, you remind me of the flame lord who dared to kill my child. I will let you have a good taste of my anger." Her glowing and hot spider but suddenly became even bigger and hotter, like a rapidly inflating balloon that could burst at any moment. She pulled a thick strand of spider silk and quickly fell upside down. Anger had given her strength, but it had also robbed her of her rationality. Her eyes, which were filled with flames, did not even notice the subtle changes in the law of fire in the surrounding space. She would never see the teasing smile on Duque's face. Quickly landing on the ground, her 5-story-tall body emitted an ear-piercing tremor. She screamed and had just raised a pair of scythe-like front claws of the Grim Reaper, when Duque's attack arrived. As a piercing sword, Duque rarely used Song of Light and Shadow to slash. Even though the strength of the blade was worthy of being a divine artifact, Duque still did not want to waste it. This time Duque used it to make a magical horizontal slash. In a 180-degree range, a golden line spread out and disappeared in a flash. As if there was a strange distortion in space, Bestilac was about to forcefully slash, but suddenly found that her body's center of gravity was off. As a 6-legged commander-tier monster in its own nest, it was impossible for her to lose her footing. The only explanation for her loss of center of gravity was that a golden line had appeared at the front of her 6 spider legs, the calf. In Xianxia's field of vision, the golden lines on these 6 legs were not broken. They were connected in a line. From the front of the broodmother's legs to the red towering boulders on the edge of the spider's nest. Only the top experts could see that when Dooku waved his sword just now, there was a golden ripple in the air. He broke through the turbid stench of the lair and swept through this not-too-small space. At first, the demigod fire demon hunter did not think it was possible. But he immediately saw that Bestilac's 6 long legs, which were almost as strong as his, were cut off in the middle by the golden line. Not only her legs, but there was also the sound of stones cracking. The golden lines on the stone wall behind the broodmother were all cut off. Because Duque swung his sword diagonally upward, the holy golden light caused the huge stones to immediately have a very smooth surface along the golden line, which was slightly inclined to the ground at an angle of 15 degrees. Several huge stones the size of hills were suddenly split in half and began to collapse diagonally under the effect of gravity. Everything around them seemed to be forced into a state of slow motion. Everyone could clearly see that the broodmother, who had lost her 6 legs, knelt forward along the slanted cut like a fanatic worshipping a supreme god. Bestilac's mouth was wide open. That should be an expression of horror, right? She screamed, "No." Even at this moment she still did not give up. In a situation where she lost control of her body, she still used her broken 6 legs to kick with all her might. Moreover, there seemed to be a blazing flame spurting out of her buttocks, temporarily using it as a flame propeller. Her whole body rushed towards Duque. At this moment, Duque's raised arms suddenly retracted. The golden arc of light slashed out again. Duque showed everyone what a melee mage was with his actions. This time everyone saw it. In the blazing hot blood mist that filled the sky, including the little spiders that had not been crushed to death by the collapsed boulders, everyone saw the pair of forearms that Beth Tillac swung down suddenly rotated 360 degrees in a very strange posture, and then fell off from the joint position. The broken parts still carried a blazing aura like that of a flamethrower. Just like that, they spun in the air and flew to the back of her huge body. The flow of time seemed to have returned to normal. Only at this moment did the collapsed boulders ruthlessly fall down, and very coincidentally, right on top of the broodmother's big buttocks. No. No. Ah ah ah. The broodmother screamed wildly, and at the same time began her ultimate move, smoldering destruction. If she really blew up the fire elements that had accumulated in her abdomen, it would probably be a small-scale nuclear explosion. There might even be a small mushroom cloud or something. However, Duque stretched out his left hand, grasped the air, and like extinguishing a spark, the fire was extinguished. Chapter 1817. No. This is impossible. The broodmother had completely collapsed. Her sharp mouthparts began to dig at the soil because of her position, but her body, which had lost 6 legs and 2 forearms, was still twisting unyieldingly. Everyone's mouths were wide open. Especially the fire demons who had just surrendered. They seemed to have seen the most incredible thing in their lives. Duque's performance was over before it even started. Those who did not know what was going on would think that Duque was just showing off the power of his melee mage. Only those who truly understood how to control the elements would understand what a terrifying thing Duque had just done. He had extinguished all the fire elements that a demigod monster had condensed. That was a terrifying amount of energy that was enough to blast everything within a radius of hundreds of meters into ashes. Duke, who controls the amount of elemental control in the fire elemental realm, is just that amazing. With a fire control technique similar to Law, he killed one of the guardians of the land of fire, Bestelak, the mother of spiders. Majordomo, she's yours. This is your reward for winning over all the fire demons to my side, Duque said calmly, and then left with the Alliance of Heroes. Majordomo was overjoyed on the spot. He had been working for Duke for many years. Although he had been forced to surrender in the beginning after so many years, even if he was not outstanding, he still had hard work even if he did not make any contributions. This time, Duke had casually tossed him a commander-level demigod that had yet to perish. This was definitely a great gift from the heavens. All the existences in the land of fire were violent. They grew by constantly killing each other, absorbing each other's power, and finally achieving evolution again and again. Of course, over the past thousands of years, there had been many powerful fire elemental creatures who had challenged the fire demon king. When Ragnaros defeated the challengers again and again, this relatively stable power structure was formed. Now that Duque had appeared out of nowhere, there was a great chance that he could change all of this. Majordomo didn't care. He laughed as he pounced forward, his sharp claws piercing into the back of the broodmother's head. Beth Tilak let out the most mournful scream since the start of the battle. She called for help from her descendants, but she didn't expect her most cherished descendants of the nightmare web spider to abandon her without any affection. As Majordomo's sharp claws continued to extract her life force and flame essence, the broodmother's struggles and screams finally weakened and disappeared. In contrast, Majordomo's aura was rising. No, it was skyrocketing. He laughed loudly and allowed the sharp black bone spikes to pierce through his body. In just a few breaths he had turned into a huge porcupine. The thing in the shape of a black sea urchin was burning more and more vigorously in the fanatical worship of the fire demons. It was conceivable that before long, a new demigod would be born from the corpse of an old demigod. Sean Knox stroked his 4 bushy mustaches and covered his mouth in the end. He was afraid that his ambition and fanaticism would be sensed by Majordomo. If it could be said that his previous surrender was a choice made out of helplessness, now he saw a new hope, a new path. Yes. As long as he showed his loyalty to the new master, he would be rewarded. Sean Knox's only remaining eye was filled with fanatical flames. Just as Duque killed a low-level demigod in 3 moves, the second group of demigods was also advancing. Against the lava giant leader Leolise, who was wrapped in thick layers of rock as armor and moved very slowly, the Bear Brothers' fatal 18 slaps were quite effective. If a mortal attacked it, they would have to attack its left and right feet, making it step on the volcano that it had summoned. This would erase the armor on its body, causing it to dig its own grave. Since they were also demigods, they didn't have to worry so much. It was a perfect example of, don't be afraid, just be tough. For huge bear paws kept flying, looking like they were doing the Big Dipper fist. Anyway, when the 2 giant bear monsters attacked, the sound was earth-shattering. It would be even better if it was accompanied by the sound effects of, oh. As 2 demigods with magic and elemental support from the weave, their cooperation and attacks were even more violent. They smashed the obsidian armor on Leolise at a speed visible to the naked eye. Armor? Smash them all. Obsidian monsters that wanted to provide armor for their boss? Smash them to death all the same. The Bear brothers ignored all attacks and fought head-on. What was even more amazing was that Duque's weave was too powerful. In the past, when Duque invaded other people's domains, he had to work hard to expand the weave to ensure the energy supply. But this time, after Duque obtained Lager's divinity, the Land of Fire was already half his home field. With Majordomo's help, he could set up elemental pipes here without any scruples. After absorbing the fire elemental energy into the weave, it would be converted into the energy needed by the demigods and directly supplied to them. The Bear brothers under Duque were now in a state of complete adrenaline. They didn't even need Avina to make a move and victory was decided. 18 seconds into the battle, Lord Leolise fell to the ground. Under the lead of a few fire demons, the demigod team headed straight for the gate to Ragnaros's main hall. The one guarding the gate was naturally the gatekeeper, Balrog. Along the way nothing happened. The problem was that the wolf god was up to something. As they walked, they saw a group of fire demons besieging a huge molten demon hound. Goldring extended his right front paw and pointed at the demon hound. "Do you know? As long as it's a canine, it will worship me if I go up and roar." Goldring ran up and roared. Then, the demon hound ignored him. It was unknown whether the wolf god had lost his mind for too long, but he didn't know that the molten demon hound was a fire elemental creature and not a canine. William said coldly, "Let me tell you, I just have to go up and I can make him believe in me." William charged up and used Bloodlust, Dragon's Roar, Wrath, and Bloodlust. Both swords slashed wildly in a dazzling manner, and it ended in less than 3 seconds. Seeing that the molten demon hound had turned into a dead dog and was lying on the ground in front of William, Goldring was puzzled. "What kind of religion is this?" William sheathed his sword and said seriously, "Many years ago I heard my uncle Duke Marcus say something like this when he was drunk. His words left a deep impression on me. That is, when the sun rises in the east, only I am undefeatable. Scholarly and martial, the divine kitchen knife sect. He should be talking about us warriors." Goldring was dumbfounded. Chapter 1818. Facing Goldring, William felt a natural sense of weakness and helplessness. Goldring was a demigod invited by the Dream Queen Isra. Moreover, Goldring had a good nature. No matter what, he was one of them. The problem was that a man talking to a wolf about life values and whatnot was just nonsense. Due to the difference in their worldviews, William couldn't convince Goldring at all. He couldn't beat him with words, nor could he beat him in a fight. Even if he could beat him, he couldn't really do it. Left with no choice, William could only learn the tricks that Duque had taught him. He talked about ideals and you talked about life with him. He talked about life with you and you talked about girls with him. Since Goldring couldn't be chased away, and he still needed William's help, William might as well lead him in circles. They could talk about anything except the bullsh** of acknowledging one's ancestors. William was forced into a corner. He couldn't accept giving up his father's name of Rin. It had nothing to do with benefits. It was purely an honor as a man and a warrior. Originally, he wasn't close to Duque mainly because he was a straightforward and impatient person. He wasn't like Duque who had so many tricks up his sleeves. Now he had to learn from Duque to go around a wolf god. It was a little ironic. The gatekeeper, Balrog, wasn't hard to find. The land of fire that descended on the southern foothills of Mount Hyjal wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. The core area was only a few hundred square kilometers. The road to Ragnaros was easy to find. It was in the northern part of the Molten Wilderness, and they could get there after defeating Balrog. It was as if some mysterious restriction had been placed on Bestalac and Lord Leolise. Before the two leaders were defeated, the road to Ragnaros' throne of destiny was covered with magma from an erupting volcano. When the news of the two leaders being killed came through the magic transmission, a huge fire elemental creature with the appearance of a Doom Walker demon appeared in front of the group of demigods and William. The eyes of the tortoise god Tatora, the wolf god Goldring, Cenarius, Howl, and William lit up at the same time. They had a natural antagonism towards demons. Perhaps they each had their own thoughts, but they all had a natural hostility towards the devil. The devil in front of him had obviously mutated. It had a typical pair of demon wings and reverse bent calves, but its exposed limbs had mottled lava marks on them. His 7-story tall body was as red as a burning iron. The strange light and heat made mortals subconsciously want to stay away from him. This team didn't have Duque's ice shield to isolate the air. However, William and the other two were wearing the magical gemstones that Duque had given them. These crystals contained a high concentration of mana and were connected to the magic net. Could be said that Duque was taking care of them remotely. William pointed at the gatekeeper standing behind the 4 fire elemental giants. Goldrun, why don't we make a small bet first? The wolf deity perked up. How is it? What are we betting on? If I win, you'll call me daddy? William snorted coldly. Let's bet on whose damage is higher in this battle, me or you. If I win, don't bother me until we finish fighting in the land of fire. The white-furred wolf deity squinted his wolf eyes. What if I win? I'll call you whatever you want for the time being. William was rather stubborn. The wolf deity immediately felt that there was hope. If he could call him daddy once, wouldn't there be a second and third time in the future? This was a good deal. Alright. The wolf deity took the bait. On the other side, Brawl and Valilla grabbed onto William. Hey, William, are you confident? That's the wolf deity with high attack power. William would never hide anything from his old partners. Under normal circumstances, I'd definitely lose, but this time I have Duque's help. When William mentioned Duque, the two friends stopped talking. Duque might be funny and unreliable, but when it came to big things, no one was more reliable than Duque. Valilla was more attentive and noticed William's strange behavior. What's wrong? Did Duque set some harsh conditions? William looked constipated. If we succeed this time, I'll have to respectfully call Duque uncle every time I see him. The two friends burst out laughing. This could be considered a secret of Stormwind. Actually, in terms of age, Duque was not much older than William. He was only 7 or 8 years older. Strictly speaking, Duque and William were of the same generation. The bad thing was that Duque had started his career too early, and he was brothers with William's father and Anduin Lothar. He should have called him brother, but he had to call him uncle. As a straightforward boy, William could not accept it. For so many years, William would call Duque Duke or Commander-in-Chief in formal situations. In private, he would only call Duque Duque, and he would not call Duque uncle unless he had no other choice. He did not expect Duque to take advantage of William at such a time. Just thinking about it made him speechless. Valilla and Brawl were too embarrassed to attack William anymore. Of course, they understood that it was better for William to call a human, who was technically his elder, an uncle than a wolf, a father. The former was still reasonable, but the latter would ruin their worldview. This was simply picking the demon that was more pleasing to the eye, and then jumping into the pit. This battle. I'll take the lead with Tortola. William volunteered, which made the other demigods look at him with surprise. Berserkers were definitely more than enough to attract the enemy's attention, but they were too fragile. How could they compare to Tortola, who carried a tortoise shell all over the streets? I think that guy's flaming blade has a special effect that weakens physical defense. It's too much of a loss to let Tortola take the lead from the start, William said. Glorious flames. Balrog's attack will awaken a burning spark in the body of his main target. The physical damage received by the target will be increased by 20%, and the target's maximum HP will be increased by 20%. Every time Balrog triggered the glorious flames, he would receive a layer of the Soul of Fire effect. Every time Balrog triggered the glorious flames, he would receive a layer of the Soul of Fire effect, which would increase the fire damage dealt by 20%. This was Balrog's skill in history. Now that there was a traitor like Majordomo Executus, there was room to hide the source of this skill. After everyone agreed, William was the first to charge forward. Unsurprisingly, Balrog directly smashed the first few glorious flames into William's body. No one expected that the flames that were supposed to increase HP would have such a magnificent change. Chapter 18-19. Right now, a bunch of big shots in the Alliance had divine weapons in their hands. This was an era of heroes. This was a blessing, but it also troubled bards. It was easy to focus on one thing and lose sight of another, overlooking some powerful divine weapons. The two underrated divine swords, Sheratol, Shadow Ripper, and Aramine, Shadow Plunderer, were the victims of propaganda. To be fair, the power and special effects of these two divine weapons were definitely not weak. It was a pity that because of Duque, William, who was once the third most powerful person in the Alliance, seemed to be a little weak. Regardless of whether it was in the original history or in this life, William was not weak at all. He inherited the soul fragment of the wolf god Goldring, in addition to the body that was tempered by the cruel battles of the slave gladiators, the two divine weapon longswords, and the experience he gained from fighting against the semi-god rankers under Duke's leadership. It was no exaggeration to say that William in this life was stronger than he was in history. Because of Balrog's huge body, he naturally had the problem of moving too much in the eyes of mortals. William was known as a writing maniac, and his agility was also very high. The flaming demon's huge swords couldn't hit William at all. Instead, William seized the opportunity to use a knockoff, meteor blast chop, and ruthlessly slashed the great demon 18 times. What was more impressive was that William's swords were rare dual-attribute divine weapons. Frowny Face Shadow Ripper had a significant increase in attack power for creatures with shadow energy in their bodies. It could also absorb flames and holy energy in the surroundings. William's HP should have increased by 20%, but it was all increased on his weapons. Shadow Plunder could absorb the shadow energy in the enemy's body and slowly convert it into the light attribute. The gorgeous sword light was continuous, and each strike was fiercer and fiercer than the one before. It was as if William could kill this demigod demon single-handedly. If it wasn't for Tortolla's transformation into a certain dragon tortoise and the hilarious but realistic windmill roll, where the tortoise's head smacked Balrog's buttocks hard, giving the archdemon a "your ass is broken, the floor is full of wounds, and your smile has turned yellow," Balrog might really have chased after Varian relentlessly. As a main MT, Tortolla's taunt skills were impressive. Without seeing him do anything, he stretched his neck and aimed the tortoise's head at the great demon, giving him a sweet smile. Taunt skill that mortals couldn't even imagine took effect. No one knew whether Tortolla, in Balrog's vision, was repeatedly ravaging him with his retractable head or something else. Anyway, Balrog waved his swords in exasperation and chased after Tortolla's tortoise shell. Clang! Dang! Clang! Every single sword strike was deflected away, but the great demon Shirliji continued slashing down. At this time, the rest of the fighters had also entered the arena. Goldring was a little nervous when he saw William slashing so happily. With a howl, it pounced from behind and attacked Balrog's back frantically, tearing with its claws and biting with its teeth. Demigods all had a scale in their hearts. Even without any statistics, they could tell whose damage was higher just by looking at the wound. Goldring said proudly, "Son, did you see that? This is the power of your father's attack. Battle depended on momentum. Imposing manner. Understand?" At first, William wanted to go all out, but he suddenly heard Duque's voice. "The aggro is about to shift. Just in time, let him attack." On the other side, the wolf god, who didn't know that he had gone too far, was acting recklessly. Who knew that the huge Balrog would suddenly turn his head and stare fiercely at him. Not good. Danger. But Goldring was still stubborn. "It's okay. Look at my gorgeous agility and dodging abilities." At this moment, Goldring didn't notice that Balrog's originally dazzling swords had changed color. It was the color of a shadow as dark as ink. Blade of Destruction. Balrog spat out the name of this move. It was almost a convention that the Burning Legion's abyssals had the word destruction in their hands, and it was usually not bad. In fact, the wolf god had already made a magnificent leap backward, jumping a full 10 meters away. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. The blade that was already 5 meters long suddenly extended like a tongue of flame. The long dark light slashed down, fiercely striking Goldring's waist that was almost bent backwards in midair. For a second, the bystanders thought that the great wolf god was going to be cut in half and die before he could even get started. Surprisingly, there were no external injuries. But at this moment, Goldring would rather have suffered external injuries. That was because the violent shadow energy had already penetrated his thick and beautiful white fur and directly entered his body, messing up his muscles and organs. Awoo, this was a downright sorrowful cry. It was also a classic example of extreme joy turning to sorrow. If it were a mortal, they would definitely kneel down after being slashed by this sword. Fortunately, he was Goldring, a powerful demigod with a demigod body. His body was not purely made of flesh and blood. A more important part of his body was his spiritual energy body. Even so, close to 90% of his life force had been destroyed by the sword just now. Cenarius, who was holding the line, was so scared that he almost peed his pants. They hadn't even seen Ragnaros yet. If they lost a main demigod, this battle would not be easy to fight. He didn't care about holding back. He immediately used Rejuvenation and Heal, followed by Tranquility, which was an ultimate skill that could heal the entire battlefield. Regardless of the fact that the power of the skill would be halved in the Land of Fire, he had to save the wolf god first. If this was in the game, the wolf god would be in a miserable state and his HP would increase by a huge amount. The wolf god, who thought that he was awesome but almost became a fool, subconsciously jumped a few steps towards Cenarius with his tail between his legs. At this time it was still better to stay close to the healer. William was inexplicably shocked at first. Then he heard Duque's shameless laughter. Don't worry, Balrog is only scary with this move. He can't make any other attacks in the shadow state. As long as you don't get hit consecutively, you won't die. William almost couldn't help but laugh. Dude, you're too bad. How am I bad? You were the one who asked for my help. You should be the one who's bad, right? Duque's words made sense. After all, it was William who asked Duque for help. As a gatekeeper, Balrog's specialty was that he could fight and carry. However, he lacked the means to recover, so he could only rely on tricks like Ordeal Crystal to put his enemies in danger. If they really fought, it wouldn't be a big deal. 3 demigods in addition to William and Lord Howl, who were powerful enough to kill gods. Balrog didn't last long before he collapsed.